Chapter 93, Chapter 93, The Black Family. Chapter 93, The Black Family. Regulus pressed his hand against the old doorbell. Ding-ling-ling. A piercing chime rang out, instantly shattering the surrounding silence. From inside the house came a sound that was somewhat terrifying. Though muffled through the door, Regulus could vaguely make out a flood of curses, insults, and profane words. Hearing it, Regulus seemed to exhale in relief. "That sounds like my mother's voice," he explained to Dracula, looking a little embarrassed. "Since I currently have no wand and have lost my magic, I can only rely on my family to open the door for me." Dracula nodded and stood with Regulus, waiting at the doorway. Yet no one came to open it. The shouting inside grew louder, gradually turning into a cacophony, as if many voices were layered together, creating an overwhelming, grating noise. Regulus's face gradually paled, more so than before. Dracula glanced at him, realizing that things were not unfolding as Regulus had expected. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers gently. The door quietly creaked open, revealing a nearly pitch-black hall before them. A damp, greyish stench rolled out, mixed with a sickly sweet smell of decay. The place felt like an abandoned house, left to rot for years. Regulus stepped forward. Even in the darkness, his years of ingrained habits allowed him to locate the gas lamp switch with ease. With a soft clatter, a row of old-fashioned lamps lit up along the walls, casting a flickering, unreal glow across the long, eerie hall, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and frayed carpet. A cobwebbed chandelier overhead flickered faintly. Its arms, along with a nearby wobbling table and candelabra, were shaped like giant snakes, a testament to the Black family's long-standing Slytherin heritage. On the adjacent wall hung several portraits, crooked and blackened with age. At that moment, the portraits all came to life, their mouths spewing the noisy shouts that had filled the house. Yet the house itself was empty. "Has my mischievous son finally returned?" A massive portrait hung beside a rotting, worm-eaten curtain. It depicted an elderly woman wearing a black pointed hat, now furiously yelling. Her outburst roused the surrounding portraits, which joined in with their own loud shouts. "That filthy, traitorous pure-blood, the disgrace of our family finally decides to come home," the old woman yelled. "I'd rather he had died in Azkaban." Seeing this portrait, Regulus couldn't even hear clearly what she was saying. His emotions overwhelmed him, and he trembled as he approached the portrait. Suddenly, the furious voice of the woman fell silent. She stared at him, stunned, her expression shifting from anger to disbelief. "Is it really, you, Regulus, my dear son?" The once shouting old woman now looked gentle, like a loving mother instead of a scolding matron. "It's me," Regulus sobbed. "I'm home, mother." The other portraits gradually quieted, staring in shock at the scene. No one noticed Dracula stepping in from the hallway corner, curiously examining the walls of portraits. He saw that the old woman's portrait was labeled Walburga Black. You're not dead, Regulus?" Walburga Black asked. "Krish said you died in the Dark Lord's cave. You have no idea how heartbroken I was. You know, your father Orion passed away not long after you left. And your rebellious, shameful brother never returned. Good riddance, such a pure-blood traitor doesn't deserve to return to the ancestral Black estate." Her eyes gleamed with a touch of madness, then grew somber. "And then I was left alone in this house. Regulus, after all these years, why didn't you come back to visit?" Regulus looked at his mother's eyes, pained, and hesitated before speaking. "I am already dead, mother. I was turned into a lethofold by the Dark Lord's magic and only regained my memory yesterday thanks to Mr. Dracula." "Oh! By Merlin's beard!" Walburga covered her mouth. You mean?" "I'm no longer a wizard, mother," Regulus said. "I am now merely the lowest of lethofolds. I am no longer worthy to return to this house." "You've become a lethofold!" An elder black portrait suddenly barked. You are the disgrace of the Black family. Such filthy creatures, stains on our bloodline cannot be allowed inside the Black estate. Regulus's face fell, his mood heavy. He turned, ready to leave this heartbreaking house. At that moment, Walburga Black intervened. Silence, she roared at the stubborn elder portrait. This is my son. I don't care what he has become. He is my son, no matter what. Regulus froze, his eyes glistening. He could hardly believe it. The mother who valued pure blood status and family honor above all had just acknowledged her son, even one transformed into a lethofold. Regulus, stay home, Walburga said loudly. This will always be your home, no matter what you've become. After your father passed, being alone here all these years gave me time to see things clearly. All right, Regulus turned, tears red as blood filling his eyes again. Yet more Black family elders emerged, criticizing Walburga for breaking ancestral traditions. Walburga, however, unleashed her torrent of words, overwhelming the elders with a verbal onslaught. She scolded them into confusion with her formidable energy. Dracula watched, amused. He spoke quietly to a portrait hiding in the corner. Your family portraits are lively indeed, Headmaster Black. Well, they're not always so uncouth, Count, Phineas Black said awkwardly, sparse eyebrows and a goatee twitching. It's just that seeing young Regulus return has stirred them up a bit. Phineas, having come from the headmaster's office out of curiosity about the commotion at the Black estate, had stumbled into a scene of family arguments and insults flying everywhere. To make matters worse, he encountered a regular visitor to his office, the formidable Count Dracula. Now, the family's secrets were fully exposed. Let them quarrel for now, Mr. Black, Dracula said after half an hour of listening to the portraits argue. We have other matters to attend to. Don't forget Voldemort's Horcruxes. Regulus snapped out of his daze, hurrying away from the noisy hall with Dracula toward the stairs leading to the second floor. Passing the long, tattered curtains lined with holes, they skirted a giant umbrella stand fashioned from a troll's broken leg, and reached the dim staircase. Along the staircase walls were panels with a row of shriveled heads. Dracula frowned at them. These are the heads of house elves that served your family, he asked, his expression dark. Regulus stiffened. Yes. They all served the Black family their entire lives, and after death, their heads were removed, he explained with some embarrassment. It's a cruel custom passed down from our great-grandmother Elidora's generation. Most of these were left by the elders who were quarreling with my mother. TCH house elves dedicated their lives to your family, only to end like this, Dracula said mockingly. Perhaps the decline of pure-blood families isn't without reason. Dracula had always thought the house elf system was fundamentally wrong. A species with considerable intelligence and magical ability, yet wholly dependent on wizards, seeing servitude as their ultimate purpose at minimum, they deserved basic respect. We have tried to reform these customs, but time hasn't given us much opportunity, Regulus said softly. By my mother's generation, she got along well with Krish and opposed the practice of beheading house elves. However, the heads left by previous generations were permanently stuck to the walls with spells. We descendants had no way to remove them. He sighed deeply, looking at the row of neatly arranged house elf heads. Permanent sticking charms, right? Dracula observed, coldly curling his lips. In the next moment, his nails extended, forming sharp claws. With a swift swing of his left hand, an invisible blade sliced through the wall, cutting down the row of house elf heads along with the outer layer of the wall. Reparo. Dracula waved his hand casually, repairing the wall as if nothing had happened. All done. The heads will stay here for now, he said, placing the long stone slab on the second-floor staircase. When you have time, bury them properly. Let them rest in peace. Regulus stared, dumbfounded, at Dracula's smooth, effortless actions. I understand, Mr. Dracula, he nodded. After handling the house elf heads, they proceeded to the second-floor sitting room. The room was a mess, coated in dust, cobwebs, and mold. Yet its layout hinted at former grandeur. A grimy large window overlooked the street outside. A fireplace, long unused, stood at the front, flanked by two ornate glass cabinets. One wall was covered by a tapestry depicting a tree-like family tree. Though old and faded, with foxes gnawing holes in several spots, the golden thread still gleamed. It traced the Black family lineage back to the medieval era. Embroidered across it in large letters, "Noble and oldest Black family, forever pure." "So this is your family tree?" Dracula studied it with interest. He saw many famous names, recognizable even to someone not closely following wizarding news. Near the top, Phineas Nigellus, the most unpopular Hogwarts headmaster in history. Near Headmaster Black's name, Araminta Mellifleur, who tried to pass a ministry law legalizing the hunting of muggles. "You have quite a few famous figures in your family." Dracula chuckled. "Though it seems none were particularly good people. Most traditional good people didn't approve of the family ideology, so they were eventually removed from the tree," Regulus said helplessly. "Your family is interesting," Dracula said lightly. He then pointed to the bottom of the tree. "Regulus Arcturus, with a birth date and a death date, 1979. "That's you, right?" Dracula asked. Regulus stared at his name, the death date beside it, and slowly nodded. "I often thought I was still the Regulus Black I used to be," he said softly. "Forgetting that I have become a lethofold, a stain on the pure blood legacy despised by my ancestors. If only their so-called pure bloods aren't stains, then the Black family wouldn't have fallen into its current state," Dracula said with a smile. "Dark beings and wizards are hardly different. Rising to greater heights depends on your choices. The four Hogwarts founders were arguably the purest of blood, right? Yet Godric and the others never cared about blood purity. They even clashed with Salazar to allow Muggle-borns into school. As for Salazar, your family's revered Slytherin founder, he also didn't care about purity. His exclusion of Muggle-borns was merely for the school's secrecy and safety." Dracula clapped Regulus on the shoulder. "So, be a fine dark creature, Mr. Black. But since becoming a lethofold, I can't even feel magic in my body," Regulus said, confused. "I don't know what to do. Perhaps I can only stay home, considered a traitor in their eyes." "Seems you don't fully trust my necromancy yet," Dracula smirked. "Relax. Once all your organs are restored, your bloodline will be replenished, and magic will naturally flow in you again. Of course, there will be minor differences. Your regenerated magic will be dark in nature. But that's no concern, right? The Black family has enough dark magic tomes." Regulus was initially startled but then smiled with relief. At that moment, a house elf trembled into the sitting room. "Master Regulus, is it really you?" he asked, eyes wide, rubbing his bloodshot, cloudy eyes. His voice was deep, hoarse, like a bullfrog's croak. Dracula turned to see an extremely old, ugly house elf. His bald head, bat-like ears bristling with white hair, his frail body barely covered by a dirty rag, skin wrinkled in excess. Yet Regulus's face lit up with joy. "It's me," he said. "I'm home, Creaker." Hearing his familiar yet strange voice, Creaker could no longer contain himself. He ran to his long-awaited master and knelt, clutching his legs. "Wah! Master Regulus, you've finally returned!" he cried for a long while. Once calmer, he managed to speak a full sentence. "Master Regulus, hurry! Go see the wall by the staircase on the second floor has been torn down. I wanted to put the heads back up like Mother did, but now there's no chance." Hearing this, Dracula's expression darkened. Well, the house elf was beyond saving. Chapter 94, Chapter 94, Creaker's Redemption. Chapter 94, Creaker's Redemption. Cough, cough. "Creaker, that panel on the wall won't be used anymore, Regulus said awkwardly. From today onward, even if your lifespan runs out, we won't be hanging your head on the wall anymore. Hey! Creaker seemed a little crestfallen. His high-pitched voice trembled. But Creaker's greatest dream was to, like my mother, have his head cut off and mounted on that panel. It's the highest honor for a house elf of the Black family. Regulus pressed a hand to his forehead, catching a glance from Dracula behind him, who was watching the scene with amusement. Regulus felt utterly embarrassed. Creaker, actually, this practice of cutting off the heads of house elves is not right, he tried to explain. It's disrespectful to you and also highly irresponsible. Master Regulus, did Creaker do something wrong? Are you dissatisfied with me? Creaker continued, whining in his unpleasant voice. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he jumped up sharply. I've got it! Master Regulus must be scolding Creaker for not destroying that accursed locket box, he shouted loudly. With that, he slammed his head against the nearby fireplace, crying out in pain as he muttered. Bad Creaker! Stupid Creaker! Stop, Creaker! Regulus shouted. Creaker finally obeyed, halting his head banging due to his instinctive obedience. Listen, Creaker. I'm not angry with you, Regulus crouched down in front of him, looking straight into the elf's eyes. Not everyone can destroy the Dark Lord's objects. It's completely normal that you couldn't. Now hand me that locket. I will find a way to destroy it. Creaker looked into Master Regulus' sincere expression, and a faint glimmer of tears appeared in his eyes. However, in the next moment, his expression suddenly shifted. He stumbled back a few steps. No! Your aura isn't Master Regulus, he cried, shaking as he spoke with unwavering conviction. Master Regulus is already dead. You must be the Dark Lord in disguise, trying to steal the Horcrux that Master Regulus gave his life for. I will never give you that locket. After saying this, he wiped his tears and vanished from sight with a pop. Regulus stared at the empty space, a profound sense of helplessness settling over him. Dracula, with this corporeal body of mine, am I really no longer myself, he said sadly. I never imagined that even Creaker would one day not recognize me. The aura of a corpse is, of course, different from a living wizard. House elves being suspicious is perfectly normal, Dracula said, stepping out from behind the tapestry. After you and your mother died, the practical master of Creaker should have become your brother. Your master-servant bond no longer exists. Besides, he personally saw you die in that cave. You repeatedly instructed him to destroy Voldemort's Horcrux. Of course he will remain extremely cautious about it. You should actually feel happy your house elf still retains the proper vigilance. But if Creaker doesn't recognize me, how can we retrieve the Dark Lord's Horcrux? Regulus asked anxiously. Didn't you tell me that the Dark Lord could return at any moment? Dracula didn't respond. He crossed his arms and walked to the spot where Creaker had vanished. Even though I've seen this many times before, I still have to marvel at how much more interesting a house elf's apparition is than a wizard's, he said with a light chuckle. He then extended a hand, carefully feeling through the air, as if searching for something. When his hand reached approximately shoulder height where Creaker had been, his eyes suddenly brightened, and he thrust his hand sharply into the void. His long fingers seemed to pierce through space, disappearing into the Black family's parlor. Then, with a slight pull, he drew his hand back. In his grasp was the wrinkled-skinned, ugly-faced house elf. It was none other than the Creaker who had just operated away. Creaker looked around the familiar parlor, still a little dazed. But in the next second, Dracula tossed him across the room. Regulus, has your house elf not bathed in decades? He said disdainfully, brushing his hands off and glancing at Regulus. He's covered in mud, especially in those skin folds. I suggest you give him a proper wash later. Creaker finally snapped to attention and rose from the floor. you are an evil demon. You should not have entered the Black family." His eyes mixed fear with terror. He trembled and took 2 steps back, attempting to apparate away again. Seeing this, Dracula raised his hand as if grasping at nothing, and an invisible force pinned Creaker to the floor, leaving him unable to move an inch. "You 2 devils, just kill me already." Creaker, seeing no chance of resistance, closed his eyes, resigned to fate. "I will never hand over the object that Master Regulus sacrificed his life for." Seeing Creaker's calm resignation, Dracula chuckled at Regulus. "Your house elf says you're a demon," he said with amusement. Regulus shook his head helplessly, crouching down before Creaker. "Creaker, I really am your Master Regulus," he said gently. "Open your eyes and look closely. Can you truly not recognize me? It would make me very sad." Creaker had no intention of opening his eyes, only letting tears stream down his face. "I saw it with my own eyes. Master Regulus was already dead, dragged into the lake by countless corpses. It's all my fault. I couldn't save him," he sobbed. "And yet even after he died, you monsters, you cruel, despicable, and heartless demons, impersonate him to steal what he gave his life for. I won't let you succeed." Regulus smiled helplessly and sat cross-legged on the floor, looking at Creaker's ugly face. "All right, Creaker," he said gently. "I'll sit here and tell you stories from my childhood, the things we went through together. Perhaps this will convince you that I am truly your master." Without waiting for a response, Regulus began recounting his own life. He spoke earnestly, as if the stories were not for Creaker, but a way to reclaim the fading memories of his own life. "I remember being the youngest child of my parents, having a rebellious brother. From childhood, he liked to oppose our parents, and even after entering Hogwarts, he broke the Black family tradition by joining Gryffindor. I knew how upset my parents were with my brother, and how much they expected from me, their youngest son. So I tried to obey them and live the way they wanted. I knew this was the only way to make them happy. Later, I entered Hogwarts as well, joining Slytherin as my parents wished. In my 2nd year, I became the seeker for the Slytherin Quidditch team and decisively defeated the Gryffindor team, which embarrassed my Gryffindor brother. When I wrote to my mother about this, she was thrilled for a long time, often using it to tease him. My parents told him, 'Regulus is a better son than you,' and I always felt proud of that." Creaker's tears gradually subsided, and he listened intently. "Of course, knowing these things doesn't prove that you are Master Regulus," he mumbled, but deep down, his resolve began to waver. "All right," Regulus smiled lightly. "Then I'll tell you some things few people know. I admired the Dark Lord from a young age, believing in his pure-blood ideals. And I truly performed well, even earning a mark from him personally before graduation. After graduating, I naturally joined the Death Eaters, and I was proud of it. But I later realized I was still too young. Reality was far harsher than I imagined. At first, I thought Death Eaters wouldn't torment Muggles and half-bloods like later, and that everyone followed the Dark Lord only for bloodline and power. But I discovered that under his influence, everyone became cruel, extreme, and violent. I knew something was wrong, yet lacked the courage to resist. What finally made me defect from the Death Eaters was when the Dark Lord tried to kill you." Regulus looked at Creaker, his tone low. "You obeyed my orders so faithfully, because I told you to return home after completing the Dark Lord's task. You used your remaining strength to come back. Creaker, it's my fault I pushed you into that abyss." "No, Master Regulus, you didn't." Creaker finally opened his eyes, crying bitterly. "Don't worry, listen to me," Regulus said with a comforting smile. "After hearing your account, I confirmed that I wouldn't die at the hands of the Dark Lord. I had seen Horcrux magic before, and his actions confirmed that the locket was indeed his Horcrux. The Dark Lord was too arrogant, believing no one would understand this advanced magic. He never imagined that someone under 20 could figure it out. That's why I had the chance to swap the real Horcrux. Creaker, still unable to move due to Dracula's restraint, sobbed uncontrollably. You can tell me what you wrote in the fake locket, he choked out. Only Master Regulus and Creaker knew the note. Regulus smiled. To the Dark Lord. He slowly read. I know when you read this, I will already be dead. But I want you to know, I discovered your secret, took the real Horcrux, and will destroy it soon. I willingly risked death, for you, encountering your destined opponent as a mere mortal. R.A.B. Regulus enunciated the last 3 letters. Creaker finally broke down completely. You really are Master Regulus. Creaker felt he could move again. He ran forward, smashing his head against a nearby table. Creaker dared doubt Master Regulus' identity. Creaker deserves death. Before hitting the table, he was scooped into Regulus' cold arms. Though the corpse body was icy, Creaker felt the warmest moment he had experienced in decades. Dracula, rather disdainful, watched this heartwarming scene. A handsome corpse and an ugly house elf embracing. He shrugged and lazily walked to the sofa, casually dismissing a few fox fairies nesting underneath, using vanishing charms to clear a pile of dead pygmy puff fluff, cleaning the sofa thoroughly with a cleaning spell, and then reclining on it. So now your Master Regulus is no longer a demon. Dracula poured himself a glass of red wine, swirling it as he smirked faintly at the 2 embracing figures. The pair only now realized there was a guest in the room, awkwardly stepping apart. If not for their corpse skin and house elf skin being hard to blush, they'd probably be red as fire lizards. Creaker, this is Dracula, the one who saved Master Regulus, Regulus introduced. He is my life-saver. Creaker bowed deeply to Dracula, nearly hitting his head on the floor. Dracula saved Master Regulus, so he is also Creaker's life-saver. The Black family welcomes Dracula's arrival, he said sincerely. Your expression changes fast, Dracula said, taking a sip of wine with interest. Just a moment ago you called me a demon, and now you're welcoming me. Creaker scratched the back of his head sheepishly. All right, now go fetch Voldemort's Horcrux, Dracula said. I've been waiting for a long time. No problem, Dracula. Creaker nodded and vanished again with a pop. 2 minutes later, with another pop, he reappeared in the parlor, holding an oval locket box. Master Regulus, Dracula, this is the item Master Regulus risked his life for, Creaker said, handing the locket to Regulus, looking sorrowful. I tried many ways, but there was no way to destroy it. Creaker, you're a useless house elf. Regulus quickly held him back, preventing him from doing something reckless like headbanging again. Creaker, don't blame yourself. Horcruxes are powerful dark magic objects. Even I might not be able to destroy it. Dracula looked at the locket in Regulus' hands, curiosity glinting in his eyes. He placed his wine glass on the low table and reached for the locket. Regulus handed it over without hesitation. Dracula, pleased with Regulus' behavior, smiled and nodded, then examined the Horcrux. A golden locket, inlaid with a sparkling green gem in the shape of a serpent, like a real venomous snake. Seeing it, Dracula's eyes widened slightly. This looks familiar, he mused, pressing the button on the locket. But the lid didn't spring open like ordinary lockets, the 2 halves remained tightly sealed. Master Regulus, I've tried. This box won't open no matter what, Creaker said. Dracula said nothing, just stared at the snake-shaped gem. Suddenly, he realized where he had seen this Horcrux. It was Salazar Slytherin's locket. This just got interesting, Dracula said, smirking, pocketing the locket. Regulus looked at him, puzzled. Dracula, even you can't destroy the Dark Lord's Horcrux, he asked. To Regulus, someone like Dracula, who mastered necromancy and could even recall the memories of the dead, should surely know how to deal with Horcruxes. If even he couldn't destroy it, was the Dark Lord truly undefeatable? Wrong. Dracula chuckled. If I wanted to destroy it, I have countless methods to deal with something so trivial. Then why not do it now? Regulus asked. Let's just say this locket is connected to an old friend of mine, Dracula said softly. He left too little behind, and I don't want to destroy it outright. This will stay with me. Trust me, when the time is right, I'll solve this problem. Dracula said with a light laugh. Chapter 95, Chapter 95, Professor Dracula published a book? Chapter 95, Professor Dracula published a book? Number 4, Godric's Hollow. Harry was picked up by the Weasley brothers Fred, George, and Ron in a flying car. Listening to Uncle Vernon yelling furiously from the window, Harry happily rolled down the car window and let the evening breeze whip through his hair. He could hardly believe it, he was free. See you next summer. Harry leaned his head out the window and shouted to the dazed figures at the window, Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley. The Weasley brothers laughed heartily, and Harry sank into the seat, grinning from ear to ear. Harry, can you tell us what happened over the holidays? Once the car was fully airborne, Ron eagerly asked. You didn't reply to a single letter. I was seriously worried. At first, I thought Errol had messed up. Errol? Harry asked. Our family owl, Ron explained. He's old. Sometimes he collapses from delivering letters. So I thought I'd borrow Hermes. Hermes? Harry asked again. That's the owl Percy got when he became head boy, Fred said from the driver's seat, glancing back. Harry was careful not to let him crash into anything. But Percy wouldn't lend it to me, Ron continued. He said he needed it himself. Percy has been acting really strange this summer, George frowned. Sending Hermes to deliver so many letters and locking himself away, does he have to polish his head boy badge that much? You drove too far west, Fred. He pointed at a compass on the dashboard. Fred adjusted the wheel. Did your dad know you took the car out? Harry asked, though he already guessed the answer. Oh, he doesn't, Ron said. He's working late tonight. Hopefully, we can sneak the car into the garage without Mum noticing. Otherwise, Dad's going to be in deep trouble. Harry silently sympathized with Mr. Weasley for a moment. Suddenly, Ron seemed to realize something. He turned his head and stared wide-eyed at Harry. Wait, were you trying to change the subject just now? He asked. No. Harry said, embarrassed, turning to look at the big moon outside. You were definitely trying to change the subject. Ron accused. Come on, tell us what you did over the holidays. Instinctively, Harry didn't want to reveal anything about the diary or Tom's involvement, so he hesitated and left out those details. I wanted to get back at the Dursleys for locking up Hedwig, so I ruined one of Uncle Vernon's big business deals. He said reluctantly. Then they completely locked me up in my room, only 2 meals a day and only 2 trips to the bathroom. That's awful. Fred fumed, shaking his fists. His movement startled George, who quickly reached out to steady the empty steering wheel. They locked up Hedwig, so not sending letters makes sense, Ron nodded thoughtfully. But why couldn't Errol find you? What? He couldn't find me? Harry asked, wide-eyed. At first, I thought Errol had gone senile. Until Hermione wrote saying her owl couldn't find you either, Fred and George realized something was wrong, Ron explained. That's why we decided to secretly come over and see if you were okay. Exactly, George added happily. If it weren't for us noticing, you might have stayed trapped until term started. A smile of relief spread across Harry's face. The flying car sped on. As the 4 young wizards neared their destination, a faint red glow appeared on the eastern horizon. The sunrise gradually turned the clear, cloudless sky a rosy hue, a sign that a beautiful day was beginning. Ollivander's St. Catchpole village, they had arrived. Fred skillfully landed the car next to a dilapidated garage, showing he wasn't driving Mr. Weasley's flying car for the first time. The garage opened to a small courtyard, which seemed to have been a stone pigpen in the past, with additional rooms patched together haphazardly into multiple floors. No professional architect would have built such a crooked house. It defied both physics and human aesthetics more so than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The only possible explanation, the house was magically pieced together. The four quietly climbed down from the car. Harry noticed the crooked red roof with 4 or 5 chimneys, and a tilted sign in front of the house reading, "The Burrow." "This place is, not much, Harry," Ron said nervously. "I know the construction is, basic, but I promise the house won't collapse on you while you sleep." "Basic?" Harry shook his head, excited. "It's amazing." Having escaped the prison of number 4, everything felt like paradise to him. And this Weasley burrow perfectly matched his curiosity for all things magical and odd. The Weasley brothers beamed at Harry's approval. They decided to sneak upstairs, surprising Mrs. Weasley when she called them down for breakfast. But the moment Ron started introducing Harry, he froze. His face turned green as he stared at the house. Fred and George followed his gaze, sensing trouble. Mrs. Weasley came trotting across the yard, sending old hens and roosters scattering in all directions. To Harry's surprise, the plump, kindly-looking Mrs. Weasley could be as fierce as a snarling lioness when angry. "This is bad," Fred whispered. "Bad? We're doomed," George added. Mrs. Weasley stopped in front of them, hands on her hips, inspecting each guilty-looking face. The atmosphere made Harry feel guilty too, and he lowered his head. Mrs. Weasley wore a floral apron with a wand tucked into the pocket. "Honestly, you three," she said. "Good morning, Mum," George said, trying to sound cute and relaxed. "Do you know how worried I've been?" Mrs. Weasley ignored him, her low, commanding voice sending shivers down their spines. "Sorry, Mum, but we had to." The 3 sons were taller than her, yet they trembled in the face of her wrath, unable to continue. "The beds are empty. No note. The car's gone. Maybe there was an accident. I was going crazy. Out of all my children, you 3 give me the least peace. Wait until your father comes home. Bill, Charlie, and Percy never did anything like this." She scolded them as if for an hour, while Harry silently listened, tense. Seeing her fully absorbed in her lecture, Fred nudged George in the hip with his elbow. "George, you're 14, not cute anymore," he whispered. "Cute won't work on Mum. Only Harry can save us now." George understood instantly and nudged Harry's left arm. Harry jumped in surprise. "Harry, our lives are in your hands." George's lips barely moved, but Harry could hear him. "Now it's your turn to get Mum's attention. Seeing you come visit, Mum will be delighted. She'll forget all about our sneaky car ride." Harry's lips moved. Looking at Mrs. Weasley like a raging lioness, he hesitated, unsure if interrupting would make her angrier or if his intervention would even help. In short, he was scared. "Quick, Harry! Distract Mum, and she'll let us off sooner," George urged again. Harry bit his lip and finally resolved. After all, it was the Weasley brothers who had rescued him from that prison, a scolding was nothing. So he stepped forward bravely. Hello, Mrs. Weasley," he said weakly. Mrs. Weasley immediately noticed him. "Oh, Harry! It's so good to see you," she said, her hoarse voice now warm and gentle, completely different from her previous fury. "Come inside for some breakfast." She seemed to have forgotten scolding her sons, turning kindly toward the house. Harry glanced at Ron and the others, and they all gave him thumbs up. Fred and George's expression clearly said, "Well done." Life at the Burrow was a world apart from number 4. The Dursleys liked everything orderly, the Weasleys' home was full of magic and surprises. The mirror above the kitchen hearth startled Harry. The first time he looked in it, it suddenly shouted, "Tuck your shirt in, you sloppy!" Up in the attic lived a few ghouls who, if it got too quiet, would wail loudly and bang pipes. In Fred and George's bedroom, small explosions constantly went off, completely normal to the Weasleys. Harry recalled their Christmas discussion about their grand plan, fireworks that could engulf the entire Hogwarts castle. They can't really succeed, can they? Harry worried about the castle's safety. But none of that was the strangest thing about the Weasleys. To Harry, the strangest thing was how much everyone seemed to like him. Mrs. Weasley thoughtfully mended Dudley's old socks that Harry could now wear. She made him eat multiple helpings every meal, fussing that he was too skinny. Mr. Weasley liked Harry sitting beside him, asking endlessly about Muggle life, what plugs were, how the post office worked. About a week after moving in, on a sunny morning, Harry received a letter from Hogwarts. "School letters," Mr. Weasley said, holding several letters delivered by the school's owls. Harry and Ron each received a yellow parchment envelope with green writing. "Harry, Dumbledore already knows you're here," Mr. Weasley said, looking pleased. "Nothing escapes that man." He handed the letters to their recipients and watched with satisfaction. Everyone read silently. Harry's letter confirmed he was to take the Hogwarts Express from King's Cross on September 1 and return to the castle. Attached was the Year 2 book list. Standard Spells, Level 2, by Miranda Goshawk. Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Phil Littaspore. Except that Miranda Goshawk's standard spells had advanced to Level 2, the rest were basically the same as Year 1, no extra purchases needed. But the last line made Harry's eyes widen. The final book read: Randomly Correcting Errors from Defensive Magical Theory, a Guide * by Vlad Dracula. The title didn't sound serious, more like a parasitic commentary on another author's work. Such books were usually unpopular. But that wasn't the key issue. Professor Dracula wrote a book. Harry asked Ron, puzzled. "No way. Professor Dracula, that lazy man, actually took the time to write a book." Ron looked just as confused. "He barely corrected assignments, I don't think he even wrote the final exams himself." Hearing Ron, Mr. Weasley looked up from his newspaper, frowning. "So, you met another unreliable defense against the dark arts professor," he said. "Honestly, Hogwarts hasn't hired a reliable one in decades." "No, Dad, Professor Dracula is the most reliable defense against the dark arts teacher I've seen in 5 years." Percy, having read his letter, defended. "He taught us in class that defensive magical theory, a guide, had some mistakes. This book is probably just to correct them." "Wait, you mean Professor Dracula was reappointed for a second year?" Mr. Weasley gasped, dropping his newspaper. Seeing the kids nod in unison, he was shocked. "Wow, Professor Dracula must be amazing. I've never seen a defense against the dark arts teacher last 2 years." "Not surprising," Mrs. Weasley said, rolling her eyes at him while clearing the table. "I saw him at Madame Putafoot's tea room during Lockhart's tea party. He's obviously a very powerful wizard and handsome too." She sparkled at the memory. "What a pity I was fooled by Lockhart all those years," she sighed. "If Professor Dracula hadn't caught him, and Dumbledore hadn't exposed Lockhart's memory theft, I'd never have known he was such a shameless crook. And don't forget," she added, "Professor Dracula entrusted us with something. Remember the crystal ball we delivered to Brown Castle when we visited Charlie in Romania?" Mr. Weasley's eyes widened as he slapped his thigh. "So he must be incredibly strong," he told Ron. "If that's the case, writing a book isn't a bad thing at all." "Yes, it's good, but it just doesn't seem like him to write a book," Ron shrugged. At that moment, Fred and George walked over, shoulder to shoulder. "Actually, we know why Professor Dracula wrote the book," they said, heads held high, mysterious. Chapter 96, Nocturne Alley. Chapter 96, Nocturne Alley. How do you two know why Professor Dracula wrote a book? Ron looked at Fred and George, suspicion written all over his face. In the living room, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Percy, and Harry also turned their eyes toward the twins, curiosity plain on their faces. Fred and George nodded with satisfaction and began to explain what they knew. You all know Cedric Diggory, right? Fred said, he was in third year. No, wait, now he's in fourth. Anyway, he got first place in our year's end-of-term exams. Then why don't you two learn from Cedric? Mrs. Weasley set down a stack of dishes, hands on her hips, frustrated at her mischievous sons. Mum, that's not the point. George protested, we're telling a story properly. All right, let's see what you've got to say, Mrs. Weasley said, nodding, finally calming down. She then picked up the dishes and tossed them into the kitchen, sending a sponge floating in midair, scrubbing the dishes to sparkling cleanliness. Harry should know this story, right? Fred continued, Cedric got a pendant made by Professor Dracula. I remember you got one too. Not just remember, it even cost the twins 10 galleons. Harry nodded, a little embarrassed. At the time, he had used Tom's diary to get extra tutoring in his favorite subject, defense against the dark arts, and naturally his grades had improved quickly. Exactly. Everyone knows Cedric was first. But very few know that he almost didn't make first place. Fred continued, oblivious to what Harry was thinking. What? Cedric's grades were supposed to be far ahead of second place. Mr. Weasley said. Amos Diggory never stops boasting about his son, my ears are nearly worn out. Are you saying Cedric isn't as brilliant as he claims? Dad, as much as I hate to admit it, Cedric really is that good, George shrugged. Usually his grades do put him far ahead of everyone else. Oh? Then what happened this time? Did he make a mistake? Mr. Weasley folded his newspaper, placing it neatly on the recently cleaned table, his attention fully on Fred and George. No, no, no. Cedric didn't make a mistake either, George said mysteriously. He just went to Professor Dracula's office right before the exam. Get to the point, George. Percy couldn't stand the twins teasing and shouted at them. Percy really has no sense of humor, Fred said with a smirk. Go on, George, they're impatient. The point is right at the end. George said, glancing at Percy with a frown. Before the final exam, Cedric went to Professor Dracula's office to ask a question. Basically, when answering the exam, should I follow the textbook defense against the dark arts, or what Professor Dracula taught in class? George is right, but do you know how Professor Dracula answered? Fred said, grinning, mimicking Dracula's voice. He told him, only what I taught in class is correct. Any conflict with the textbook? The textbook is wrong. That can't be. Percy said, astonished. I wrote everything according to the textbook and didn't lose any points. That's exactly the problem. George said. The final exam wasn't even set by Professor Dracula, nor graded by him. He even forgot to tell Professor Dumbledore who was grading it. So Cedric, who wrote his answers exactly according to what Dracula taught, ended up losing a lot of points. Fred and George said in unison. If it weren't for the fact that the textbook wasn't too far off, Cedric might not have even gotten first place. Poor Cedric, Mr. Weasley sighed, raising a cup of water to drink. His expression suddenly changed, and he spat out the water. Wait, who graded the exam again? He asked, shocked. Dad, you heard correctly. Professor Dumbledore, George said cheekily. He set the exam, he graded it. Who knows what secret deal he made with Professor Dracula? Exactly. So Harry and Ron's confusion about Professor Dracula writing a book makes perfect sense, Fred said. A lazy man like Dracula? Why would he suddenly decide to write a book? Yet, Fred, Ron said, puzzled. How does Professor Dracula writing a book connect to Cedric losing points? You wouldn't understand, little Ronnie, George said with a wicked smile. A few days ago, we invited you to the hill across the way to play Quidditch with Cedric. That's when Cedric told us the secret. But at the time you refused to come because you were busy studying wizard's chess at home. Hearing the humiliating nickname Little Ronnie, Ron jumped up, ready to pounce on George. Harry held him back tightly. After he got his results, Cedric went to Professor Dracula's office again, Fred continued, but this time to argue, asking why he lost so many points. That's why Professor Dracula wrote a book, George said with a smile. Everyone present nodded in agreement. If they were surprised that Dracula would patiently write a book, they weren't surprised that he did it to save face. That was very much in line with his character. At that moment, a grey, dusty feather duster fell clumsily through the crooked window. Harry looked at it, only to realize that it was breathing. Errol! Ron shouted. He picked up the filthy, sickly owl from the floor and pulled a letter from under its wing. Finally, a reply from Hermione. I wrote to her saying we were going to rescue you from the Dursleys. He tried to set Errol on a crossbeam by the back door, but the owl was too exhausted and fell immediately. Ron placed him on a wider tabletop, muttering, Poor Errol. How old is this feather duster? No, this owl. Harry started to ask Fred, almost saying what he was thinking out loud, but awkwardly changed course. The Weasley family didn't seem to mind, they were probably thinking the same thing. Errol was bought by the family when Bill started school, Fred said. Now, Bill's been graduated for 5 years. Harry counted on his fingers and realized Errol was already 12, about the same age as the oldest owl. Then he really is, not young anymore, Harry said sympathetically, looking at Errol lying on the table. We've long wanted him to enjoy his old age, but the family's been too poor. Ginny is starting school this year, too, there are so many things to buy, Mr. Weasley sighed. So we just have to make Errol work a little longer. Once things are better, we'll find him a good place to retire. Harry looked again at the elderly owl, hoping it would live long enough for the Weasleys to be more well off. By now, Ron had finished reading Hermione's letter. Merlin's beard, Hermione is still busy with homework even in the summer, he exclaimed. Exactly. It's a miracle she didn't get first place in defense against the dark arts. George patted Harry's shoulder. He still felt a little bitter about losing 10 galleons to Harry. And you all better learn from her. Mrs. Weasley scolded. You three Fred, George, and Ron are the hardest to manage. The days at the Burrow passed quickly, and soon it was the day Harry was supposed to meet Hermione and go shopping for school supplies in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Weasley woke the little wizards early. They each hurriedly ate 5 or 6 instant sandwiches and put on their coats. Mrs. Weasley brought a flower pot from the kitchen mantel and handed it to Harry first. Guests first, she smiled. Harry, you go ahead. Harry froze, staring at the flower pot. I'm supposed to water the plant, he stammered, searching for a container to fill it with, wondering if it was some strange wizarding tradition to water a plant before traveling. Mum, he's never used Floo powder before. Ron said. Sorry, Harry, I forgot to mention that. You've never used Floo powder? Mr. Weasley asked, astonished. Then how did you get to Diagon Alley last year to buy your supplies? I took the subway. Harry said weakly. Oh, some new Muggle transportation. Mr. Weasley asked excitedly. A subway? How does it work? Is it like a car? How does it run? Not now, Arthur, Mrs. Weasley interrupted. Floo powder will definitely be faster than the subway, but... Merlin, if you've never used it before. He'll be fine, Mum, Fred said with unexpected confidence, patting Harry on the shoulder. Harry, Just watch what we do." He pinched a handful of glittering powder from the flower pot, stepped to the fireplace, and threw the powder into the flames. With a whoosh, the flames turned bright green. The green flames shot higher than Fred's body as he stepped into the fire, clearly saying a word. "Diagon Alley." In an instant, he disappeared. George followed, reaching into the flower pot, then vanished into the rising flames. Mrs. Weasley and Ron gave Harry many instructions, and he memorized them carefully, nodding from time to time. After Mr. Weasley also left the fireplace, Harry looked at Mrs. Weasley and Ron, seeing their encouraging eyes. He nodded firmly. He tried to remember every instruction, then grabbed a pinch of fluo powder, walked to the flames, and took a deep breath. He threw the powder into the fire and stepped forward. The green flames surged, sending a hot wind. He inhaled sharply and immediately drew in a mouthful of scorching ash. Cough. "Diagon Alley." He coughed, repeating the words. Next, he felt himself being sucked into a massive electrical-like tunnel. He spun violently, deafened by the roaring sound, desperately trying to open his eyes, but the rapidly spinning green flames made him dizzy. After who knows how long, he fell face down onto cold stone. His glasses were shattered. Dizzy and covered in soot, Harry carefully stood up, placing the broken frame on his nose, and looked at the unfamiliar surroundings. It appeared to be a spacious, dimly lit wizard shop. He was standing before a stone fireplace. But everything around him was extremely bizarre, none of it resembling Hogwarts shopping lists. In a glass case lay a withered human hand, a stack of blood-stained cards, and a glassy, lifeless eyeball. Grotesque masks stared down from the walls, and various human bones were displayed on the counters. Rusted, sharp-toothed instruments hung from the ceiling. Looking out the dusty shop window, he could see a dark, narrow alley. This was definitely not Diagon Alley. London, Nocturne Alley, the White Dragon Pub. An old-looking pub, located on the second floor of a black wizard tattoo shop. Its exterior was made of exquisite marble, with a massive metal sign depicting a bipedal dragon with white scales. Unlike most noisy, chaotic pubs, this one was remarkably quiet. Inside, there were several hidden rooms, each protected by extremely strong magic, ensuring complete secrecy for its patrons. One luxurious room was made entirely of gold, with crystal windows and chandeliers hung with blood-red gems. The edges of the tables were inlaid with countless pure diamonds. The opulence reflected the wealth of the dragon motif in every detail. The pub had existed for hundreds of years but had never been opened to outsiders. Yet today, patrons were astonished to see the pub owner, who had not aged in decades and usually remained cold, respectfully leading a silver-haired man to the door of the luxurious room. She extended her finger and drew a pattern on the gold-decorated door. In the next moment, the door, which had remained closed for centuries, silently opened. The patrons watched in shock, whispering among themselves, curious about the identity of the silver-haired man. The usually quiet pub became unusually noisy. At that moment, the white-haired owner, with a streak of blood red in her hair and a pair of black-red dragon horns on her head, turned to glare at the whispering patrons with her eerie yellow vertical pupils. "The rules of silence in this pub, have you forgotten?" she said coldly. Everyone shivered and immediately closed their mouths. The owner then relaxed her expression and respectfully entered the room. "Lord Dracula, any instructions?" she asked softly. Dracula casually sat on the soft sofa, looking at her. "Bring me a bottle of wine from the pub, the kind the dragon clan collected long ago," he said lightly. "Also, someone will come to see me later. Not an important figure, have a server bring him up." "Yes," the owner nodded and left. Not long after, a pale-faced wizard with cold grey eyes and light blonde hair entered the White Dragon pub, carrying his wand. "I'm here to see Mr. Dracula," he said to the server at the door. "Mr. Malfoy, right," the server said with a polite smile. Lucius Malfoy nodded proudly, clearly confident in his surname. Yet the server paid no attention to the name, merely gesturing toward the door inside. "This way, please." They passed through the silent hall, where wizards quietly drank, speaking in whispers. Lucius recognized several acquaintances, who nodded to him but didn't speak, careful not to break the pub's rules and anger the fearsome owner. Once, a wizard of considerable skill doubted the rules and caused a commotion. He ended up a charred skeleton. Lucius followed the server to the most luxuriously decorated door. Seeing the gesture indicating the door, he widened his eyes in astonishment. Chapter 97, Chapter 97, The Dark Lord Returns? Chapter 97, The Dark Lord Returns? "Mr. Dracula, is he in this room?" Lucius asked in a small voice, eyes wide, glancing at the nearby attendant. "Mr. Dracula is indeed in this chamber, Mr. Malfoy," the attendant replied with a smile. Lucius swallowed nervously. He lifted his hand several times as if to knock on the door, then lowered it again. He still couldn't believe that this door would ever be opened, let alone that he might actually have the chance to step inside. "Come in, Lucius." At that moment, Dracula's uniquely rich voice echoed from within. The luxurious door, dazzling in its grandeur, slowly opened. Lucius finally exhaled, pushing the door and stepping carefully into the chamber. Even as the current head of the Malfoy family, Lucius had seen many grand scenes, yet upon entering this room, he still drew a sharp breath and couldn't help glancing around. "So, tell me, what important matter did you arrange this meeting for?" Dracula took a sip from his crystal glass, the liquid inside glowing a golden red hue, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. Lucius, still in shock, seemed deaf to Dracula's words. After a long moment of hesitation, his curiosity finally got the better of him, and he asked, "Mr. Dracula, why are you here?" Dracula put down the glass and turned to look at Lucius. "Mr. Malfoy, if my memory serves me correctly, weren't you the one who stayed behind after the board meeting and secretly arranged to meet me at the White Flying Dragon bar?" No. I meant, how did you end up in this chamber?" Lucius quickly clarified. "I heard that in over 100 years, this door has never been opened." "Because this chamber was reserved for me from the start," Dracula said, raising his glass again and leaning comfortably into the soft cushions. "Any more questions?" Lucius outwardly remained calm, but inside, a storm of thoughts churned. As far as he knew, this luxurious chamber had existed for at least a century, and if it hadn't been opened all that time because of the man before him, then this seemingly no more than 30-year-old man, how old was he, really? With that thought, Lucius lowered his head in resignation and replied, "No more questions, Mr. Dracula." "Very well. Now, tell me, what important matter do you wish to discuss?" Dracula poured himself another glass, not offering one to Lucius. Lucius carefully set his wand at his side and, glancing around at the chamber's tight security, lowered his voice. "Mr. Dracula, the Dark Lord has returned." Dracula paused, the glass at his lips stopping mid-air. He chuckled lightly and set the glass down. "And you thought to tell me such a secret?" he asked with amusement. You don't seem surprised at all," Lucius said, stunned. He had expected at least a hint of shock from Dracula. "I've known this for some time," Dracula said casually, his eyes catching the faint black mark on Lucius' left arm. "Fenrir Greyback, a fellow Death Eater, you know this werewolf, yes?" "He was a werewolf who sided with the Dark Lord during the last Wizarding War," Lucius admitted reluctantly. "But he was hardly a true Death Eater, just a tool the Dark Lord used. Could it be that this fool already spilled the news?" Lucius felt uneasy. If Dracula already knew of the Dark Lord's return, the value of this information would be greatly diminished. "No, he didn't," Dracula replied. "That werewolf got hold of one of Voldemort's inferi and came to cause me trouble. But he's been caught, and it was easy for me to extract the information from his memories. However, the information Fenrir obtained is incomplete, Lucius said, biting his lip. He was sent on a mission months ago. Any newer intelligence couldn't have reached his memory. Originally, Lucius had intended to play both sides, waiting to see which faction would prevail before committing. But after arriving at the White Flying Dragon Bar and seeing the century-old luxurious chamber reserved for Dracula, he realized the man's power must be considerable. Lucius believed that even if Dracula weren't a match for Voldemort or Dumbledore, he was still formidable. Most importantly, this professor's moral flexibility suited Lucius' needs. Thus, Lucius used the pre-term board meeting as an opportunity to summon Dracula for a private discussion on collaboration. Seeing Dracula in that century-old chamber and recalling the parchment that could expel board members, Lucius suddenly realized that Dracula's identity might be far more complex than he imagined. "Interesting," Dracula said, lips curling in intrigue. "I'm thinking, next time Voldemort uses the black mark to summon you all, I could just apparate there and deal with his new body myself." Lucius turned pale. "Mr. Dracula, please don't," he exclaimed. "Even if you could defeat the Dark Lord, if he isn't killed completely, he'll suspect me the next time he returns. Hope you'll spare me in return for the information I've provided." "Very well. Seems like I can't go picking on him just yet," Dracula said disinterestedly. "You can leave. Remember to send me a list of the dark magic items you dealt with." Of course, of course." Lucius wiped the sweat from his brow and hurriedly left the luxurious chamber. Speaking with someone who casually mentioned messing with the Dark Lord was stressful beyond measure. After Lucius departed, Dracula poured himself another glass of wine but found his interest in drinking had waned. "School is about to start, yet I still haven't found an assistant." Dracula slumped into the soft sofa, gazing out the window. Through the crystal panes, he observed the narrow alleyways of Nocturne Alley, filled with wizards and dark creatures of questionable repute. "Hey!" Dracula murmured. He noticed a small figure with round glasses passing by. Chapter 98, Chapter 98 The First Reappointed Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor. Chapter 98 The First Reappointed Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor. Harry quietly slipped out of Box Antique Shop, pressing his cracked glasses against his nose as he glanced around. Before him was a filthy alley, lined with shops steeped in dark magic. Box was the largest among them, and in the window of the shop across the way, several shrunken human heads were displayed, looking grim and macabre. Between the two storefronts, a large cage was crawling with enormous black spiders. In a dark doorway, two ragged wizards whispered while watching him, and some non-human creatures licked their lips in his direction. Harry shivered and wanted nothing more than to leave this eerie place behind. He jogged along, occasionally adjusting his broken glasses. Yet, 2 minutes later, he realized with dismay that he had lost his way. "You're not lost, are you, dear?" Suddenly, a hoarse, unpleasant voice whispered in his ear, startling him. An old witch stood before him, holding a plate that seemed filled with what looked like entire dead fingernails. Her gaze was sinister, and her moss-covered teeth glinted in the dim light. Harry trembled and stepped back. "I'm fine, thank you," he stammered. "I just..." At that moment, Harry felt something grab him by the shoulders and lift him into the air. The old witch reached out with her sharp nails, trying to snatch him from above, but Harry's rapid ascent kept him out of reach. His legs flailed in panic, trying to free himself, yet he feared that if he fell, he would again become the witch's prey. "Honestly, lately I've been reading the updates consistently, switching sources, using multiple narration voices, works on both Android and Apple." Summoning his courage, Harry turned his head, hoping that the thing holding him was something he had learned about in defense against the dark arts. After all, he had placed first in the first year final exam. Perhaps he could find the proper solution. Turning fully, Harry saw a massive bat clutching him from behind, its wings beating powerfully. The bat looked vaguely familiar. Like like the one that had caught him during a Quidditch match. Harry's racing heart eased slightly, and he even began to enjoy the view from above. He saw the ugly old witch's frustrated expression, the many unscrupulous wizards staring in shock from the narrow alley, and a luxurious window that looked completely out of place among the alley's shabby facades. Inside, a silver-haired man sat, elegantly holding a crystal glass and sipping wine. The bat slowed its wing beats, hovering beside the window. Then, with a sudden acceleration, it flung Harry toward the wall beside the window. "Ah!" Harry screamed, seeing the marble wall rushing toward him. At the last moment, the silver-haired man glanced sideways at him. In the next instant, the marble wall seemed to liquefy, rippling in spiral patterns. Harry passed straight through it, landing heavily on a soft sofa. "Mr. Potter, I believe you owe me an explanation for appearing in Nocturne Alley, a rather dangerous place," Dracula said calmly beside him. "Were you curious and snuck in?" "Professor Dracula." Hearing his voice, Harry felt a weight lift off his chest, and hoarsely replied, "I got lost. It's my first time using fluo powder today, and I accidentally inhaled some soot, so I might have mispronounced the words. Diagon and knock don't exactly sound alike. How much soot did you inhale?" Dracula asked with a teasing smile. He noticed that Harry was indeed covered in soot, dirtying even the luxurious sofa cushions. Dracula frowned slightly. It's clear you inhaled quite a lot of soot." He snapped his fingers, and instantly, the soot in the room vanished, along with Harry's glasses, which were repaired to pristine condition. "Thank you, Professor," Harry said weakly. "This Nocturne Alley doesn't feel like a place for decent people." "Oh, I didn't mean to imply you weren't decent." Dracula's face darkened immediately. "Do you know who that old witch who tried to stop you was?" he asked coldly, his smile now sinister. "This will be covered in second-year classes after the term starts, and if you studied at home, it shouldn't be hard to answer." "Ah!" Harry froze. Wasn't she just a strange-looking, odd-tempered old witch? "Clearly, you haven't studied the material ahead of time," Dracula said with a pleased expression. "If you looked closely, you'd notice her face and neck had many warts, similar to fungi or solid blisters on the skin. If you observed even more carefully, you might see her front feet are much narrower than normal, because this type of creature has only 4 toes. So, that old witch just now wasn't a wizard?" Harry asked, shocked. "Correct," Dracula chuckled. "She was a harpy. Harpies love eating livers raw, especially children's livers. If I hadn't happened to be nearby, you likely would have been torn apart, leaving no remains at all." Harry broke into a cold sweat, realizing how close he had come. He vowed never to enter Nocturne Alley again. "Since you didn't prepare at home, the first 2 weeks back at Hogwarts, you'll have double the usual homework," Dracula said, eyeing Harry, whose face had turned green from fear. "Professor, I didn't prepare for a reason," Harry quickly explained. "After returning to the Muggle household, my uncle and aunt hid all my magical items, so I never had the chance to study." "What a pitiful child," Dracula said. Harry's face brightened slightly, thinking his homework wouldn't be doubled. "But what does that have to do with me?" Dracula's next words shattered his joy. "And how would I know whether that's just an excuse? Even if what you said is true, the fact that you came to Nocturne Alley using fluo powder means you left the Muggle household and stayed with a wizarding family for a while." I guess it was the Weasleys." "During your stay at the Weasleys, did you only play and completely neglect your studies?" Harry stared blankly at Dracula's long-winded lecture and finally understood. Whether he had prepared or not didn't really matter. This petty-minded professor simply wanted revenge for the word indecent he had uttered earlier. Fuming, Harry stood up, staring directly at Dracula, and said decisively, "Professor, I am willing to accept having double homework." Seeing Dracula's faintly amused expression, Harry chose to yield. Resistance was useless, better to agree quickly and prevent the homework from tripling. Besides, Dracula rarely assigned much work, as long as Hermione didn't remind him. "Professor, you are correct. I am indeed staying with the Weasleys now," Harry said. "I mispronounced the words and ended up in Nocturne Alley, losing sight of them. They must be very worried. So, could you take me to Diagon Alley?" Dracula glanced at him and casually placed his crystal glass on the table. "Then let's go. I happen to be heading out as well." He rose and approached the window of the room, lifting it open. Originally, when this room was first built, the luxurious window couldn't be opened, to ensure privacy. But Dracula found it cumbersome to go around the central hall, pass the booths, go down the stairs via the White Dragon Bar's second-floor entrance, and reach the Black Wizard tattoo shop on the first floor. Jumping through the window was far quicker. So the White Dragon Bar's landlady had someone modify the window to open and close at Dracula's convenience. Now, Dracula easily lifted the window and jumped down. Thanks to prior experience in Dada class, Harry gritted his teeth and followed Dracula out the window. Sure enough, just before landing, a bat flew under his feet, cushioning his fall and allowing him to land safely in the narrow, shadowy alley. After the two departed, the luxurious window automatically closed, returning to its previously sealed state, leaving no chance for curious onlookers. Dracula folded his arms and leisurely guided Harry through the winding alley toward Diagon Alley. Harry noticed that the previously menacing gazes of the alley's inhabitants had changed. Seeing him with Dracula, fear and awe replaced their hostility, and no one dared to stare directly at them, quickly averting their eyes. "Professor, everyone here seems afraid of you," Harry asked curiously. "Have you dealt with them before?" Dracula glanced at the black wizards and dark creatures on both sides of the street and snorted disdainfully. "Them? I can't be bothered with them." Harry silently gave a thumbs up, as there was no way to argue with Dracula's overwhelming confidence. The reason was simple. In a dark magic-infested alley like Nocturne Alley, Dracula himself was a source of dark power. Even a slight display of it would deeply affect the black wizards and dark creatures here. Those who survive in such a place are far from fools, with senses far sharper than normal. Even without having met Dracula before, they could feel that the silver-haired man beside Harry was not to be trifled with. After about 5 or 6 minutes, the light ahead grew brighter, gradually dispelling the gloom and darkness of the alley. Finally, they reached the bright outdoors, and Harry could see a familiar snow-white marble building, Gringotts Bank. "You don't need me to accompany you the rest of the way, right?" Dracula asked, stopping. He glanced disdainfully at the sunlight spilling into the alley and stepped into a shadow under a shop eave. "Yes." Harry nodded heavily. "Thanks for your help today, Professor Dracula." He ran toward Gringotts, spotting Hermione waving happily on the marble steps. Dracula watched Harry leave, then glanced at the approaching Weasleys, chuckling and shaking his head. In the next instant, his figure disappeared into the shadow under the eave. Back in Hogwarts' Great Hall, most of the staff had already gathered. A curious phenomenon at this school was that many professors lived on campus. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and others were older, single wizards. With no family obligations, they spent the summer entirely at Hogwarts, with the students effectively serving as their family. Without external research trips, they stayed at Hogwarts the entire break. At that moment, Snape whispered something to Dumbledore, McGonagall busied herself with the new student list and the opening feast schedule, and Flitwick chatted happily with Sprout. Suddenly, the light in the hall dimmed. "Hey? Is it going to rain?" Flitwick looked at the magically enchanted ceiling. "I don't see any clouds." "Perhaps Professor Dracula has arrived," McGonagall said calmly to Flitwick. "He often does things like this when students aren't around." Indeed, in the next moment, Dracula appeared at the staff table, elegantly taking his seat. Dracula had never liked the enchanted ceiling, as it allowed sunlight indoors. So, using Hogwarts' magical power nodes, he had found a way to adjust the ceiling's opacity, controlling the light level. In short, he could dim the ceiling. Of course, when students were present, this was inappropriate, as it could affect their dining mood and risk revealing his vampire nature, though Dracula himself didn't care, only Dumbledore did. This explained the sudden dimming of the Great Hall. Seeing Dracula seated, Dumbledore sent Snape to his own seat and led the applause. Let us congratulate Professor Dracula. He has become the first Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in decades to be reappointed for a second year at Hogwarts. Chapter 99, Chapter 99, Where has Nagini gone? Chapter 99, Where has Nagini gone? Hearing Dumbledore's congratulations, the Great Hall erupted into warm applause. All the staff clapped willingly and sincerely. After all, for a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor to secure a second-year term without incident, something that hadn't happened in decades, was truly remarkable. Professor Dracula seems to have quite a bit of luck. Since taking the post, he hasn't run into any chaotic situations, Professor Flitwick remarked with admiration. Previous Defense Against the Dark Arts professors always seemed to encounter all sorts of strange incidents. It was stressful just watching. Flitwick, you don't know the half of it, Dumbledore said with a smile as he looked at him. Professor Dracula has indeed run into countless strange events, but he has skillfully resolved them all. And this was indeed true. The curse Voldemort placed on the Defense Against the Dark Arts position had its limits. It could not directly kill the current professor. The curse subtly influenced a person's fortune, amplifying their misfortune, making them choke on cold water, trip over their own feet, or even laugh themselves to death at a joke. The closer one got to the one-year term limit, the more pronounced and harmful these effects became. Yet Dracula did not care about these minor misfortunes. No difficulty could truly affect him. Whether it was encountering Fred and George plotting some outrageous stunt, being ambushed by a giant at Halloween, staring down a basilisk in the Forbidden Forest, or fighting the infamous Dark Lord of the Wizarding World. All of these strange events barely left a mark on him. At most, they added a touch of excitement to his otherwise mundane life. Amidst the lively atmosphere, the staff-exclusive lunch gradually came to an end. After the plates were cleared, Dumbledore called Dracula, and the two left the Great Hall together, heading toward the Headmaster's office. Professor Dracula, before you go, please adjust the ceiling brightness in the hall back to its original state, Dumbledore said with a smile. Also, in such bright sunlight, I assume you wouldn't want to apparate directly to the 8th floor from the entrance courtyard. You're right, Dracula replied indifferently, nodding, then casually restored the ceiling to its original state. But that doesn't mean I have the leisure to walk the stairs with you. Before he could finish, Dracula vanished from the spot, appearing in the Headmaster's office ahead of Dumbledore via apparition. Dumbledore shook his head helplessly and called Fawkes, allowing the Phoenix to teleport him instantly into his office as well. Professor Dracula, I think you don't need to constantly seek excitement and high-paced thrills. You could try to find joy in the ordinary, Dumbledore said as he appeared, addressing Dracula, who was lounging on the sofa, fiddling with the sorting hat. As a man over 100 years old, I've probably lost the impatience of youth. Sometimes, a quiet stroll on the stairs can be a delight. Happiness is not merely an expression of emotion, but a state of life. It's the contentment of appreciating every little detail of this castle. Dracula tossed the chattering sorting hat aside and glanced at Dumbledore. You're right. As a man over 100, you can indeed find joy in small things, he said casually. But as someone over 1,000 years old, I've long grown bored of trivial matters. Why would I accompany you up the stairs? Dumbledore's expression froze in astonishment. Facing this young face and playful personality, he subconsciously overlooked that Dracula was already over 1,000 years old, and today he had just cited age as an example in front of someone far older than himself. Ah, Professor Dracula, have you recently heard any secret rumors? Dumbledore swiftly changed the topic. Secret rumors? How secret are we talking? Dracula's interest peaked as he sat up slightly. Dumbledore's expression turned serious as he stared intently into Dracula's eyes. Voldemort has returned, he said in a low voice. Dracula, however, merely smirked and lay back on the sofa. I get the feeling, someone has been trying to tell me about Voldemort's return all this time. You already knew? Dumbledore asked in surprise. Yes, is that so strange? Quite a few people I met recently know about it. I almost thought everyone already did, Dracula replied casually. Your news came from Snape, right? You even knew that? Dumbledore felt a bit numb, helplessly staring at Dracula. Of course, it was obvious, Dracula said. Last year, when Snape fought me in the defense against the dark arts classroom, I happened to notice the dark mark on his arm and casually checked his background. Since a former Death Eater like Snape could earn your trust, it's clear he must have sided with you before the last Wizarding War ended, and not switched sides after Voldemort's downfall. Too bad Voldemort's a fool. He should have known that if someone as clever as you trusted Snape, there must be something suspicious going on. Dumbledore couldn't help but chuckle, restraining a laugh. Don't underestimate young Tom. Even now, his power and intellect should not be taken lightly. We must remain vigilant. Ugh, he mutilated his own body with dark magic for the sake of immortality, Dracula said with relish. I cannot agree with your use of clever to describe him. Let's return to the main topic, Professor Dracula, Dumbledore said, shaking his head with a smile. After being beaten into retreat by you, Voldemort did not suffer any serious injuries. Within months, he returned to the wizarding world, even restoring a proper body. That's like a slap in your face, Count, Dumbledore said, half teasing. Dracula's eye twitched slightly. At first, he hadn't considered this angle when he learned of Voldemort's return. But after Dumbledore bluntly pointed it out, Dracula felt a little embarrassed. Voldemort had restored himself so quickly even after his soul was nearly destroyed. It was a direct challenge to his pride. I can't stand it. The more I think about it, the angrier I get. Dracula exclaimed, sitting up from the sofa. I'll go catch Voldemort and deal with him properly myself. Better hold on a moment, Professor Dracula. Dumbledore, seemingly expecting Dracula's emotional reaction, calmly pulled a parchment from his drawer, labeled Plan. Instead of repeatedly trying to destroy Voldemort's fragmented soul, only for him to resurrect under the protection of Horcruxes, we should consider how to eliminate him once and for all. He pushed the parchment toward Dracula. Dracula looked down at it. 3 pre-prepared steps were outlined. 1. Investigate how Voldemort quickly restored his strength and obtained a body. 2. Determine the actual number of Voldemort's Horcruxes and destroy each one. 3. Use undercover agents to monitor Voldemort's movements and prevent him from threatening the wizarding world. Meanwhile, Voldemort himself, the subject of Dracula and Dumbledore's intense discussion, walked happily along a path in the Albanian forest. Having been in hiding for over a decade, he was pleased that so many of his followers still responded to the dark mark. Many were powerful and influential figures, including Dumbledore's confidant, Snape. Voldemort's face bore an evil grin as he silently mocked Dumbledore. Dumbledore prides himself on reading people's hearts, yet he did not know that the head of Slytherin he trusted completely had long been working for the Dark Lord, gathering information at Hogwarts for over a decade. Thinking of Hogwarts, Voldemort also couldn't help but frown at the vampire count who had gone to teach there for no reason. Why did Dracula, already gifted with immortality, choose to go to Hogwarts as a professor and disrupt his plans? Voldemort's teeth itched with rage. He wanted to cast countless cruciatous curses on Dracula and end his effortless immortality with a killing curse. But he knew he could not face Dracula directly now. He needed to develop slowly, waiting until his Horcrux diary absorbed Harry Potter's blood to restore his body fully, reaching the peak of his strength. Then he would be confident of having a chance against Dracula. To gain the power to challenge Dracula, Voldemort decided to advance one crucial task. He had always believed the number 7 held great magical power in the wizarding world, so he planned to divide his soul into 7 parts, thinking this would grant him stronger abilities. Unbeknownst to him, 12 years ago in Godric's Hollow, he had inadvertently placed the 7th soul fragment inside his nemesis, Harry Potter. Thus, his current trip to the Albanian forest was to create what he considered his final Horcrux. He had already chosen the 6th Horcrux, the snake that had accompanied him in his lowest, weakest days, the loyal Nagini. Of course, this carried risks. Even Voldemort, master of soul splitting and Horcrux creation, had never split his soul into a living creature before. But he adored Nagini. Unlike mindless snakes that only obey commands, Nagini possessed extraordinary intelligence. She could communicate fluently with him, understand his struggles, and share his anger. Even her name came from a conversation with her. Voldemort himself learned it from her. He was determined to make this magical snake his Horcrux, ensuring she would always remain by his side as a companion he could communicate with when he felt the chill of absolute power. Walking through the Albanian forest, Voldemort smiled, searching for Nagini's trail. Hours passed. Using the parcel tongue over and over, his throat grew hoarse, yet the only responses he got were from ordinary, foolish forest snakes. Nagini seemed to have vanished into thin air. Voldemort's expression darkened ominously. In a hidden cave, 2 snakes, one large, one smaller, huddled quietly in the shadows. The description of large and small was only relative. Both were enormous. Any appearance in the Muggle world would cause a major stir in the animal kingdom. One was a dazzlingly green snake, nearly 50 feet long, with a red feather on its head. The smaller snake, a speckled viper, was 12 feet long, still massive, though much smaller than the green serpent beside her. The 2 snakes trembled in the shadows, ignoring the occasional hissing parcel tongue from outside the cave. Suddenly, Voldemort's tone shifted from casual to commanding. "Nagini, come out and meet me." Hearing the authoritative parcel tongue, the smaller viper momentarily lost her wits and began slithering toward the cave entrance. But the giant snake, using its size advantage, pinned Nagini down, preventing her from walking into Voldemort's trap. Only after Voldemort left did Nagini regain her composure, appearing somewhat dazed. "I told you, didn't I, Nagini?" the giant snake hissed. "Just a short while without seeing him, and he already shouts like that. I'm telling you, Voldemort is no good." Nagini nodded slightly, glancing at the large snake beside her. "Thank you, Grandpa," she hissed. "If not for you, it might have taken me another 12 years to see through this man's true nature." Chapter 100, Chapter 100, Both Voldemort and the Diary are troubled. Chapter 100, Both Voldemort and the Diary are troubled. The acquaintance between the Basilisk and Nagini actually goes back several months. After Voldemort's attempt to steal the Philosopher's Stone failed, Dracula utterly annihilated his soul above the Forbidden Forest, then returned to the restricted area where the stone was kept and released the Basilisk. Dracula placed the Basilisk in the forests of Albania, intending for it to help him locate Ravenclaw's diadem, in order to fulfill his earlier promise to Helena. Given Dracula's immense authority, established over 1,000 years of repeatedly tormenting the Basilisk, the creature immediately set to work upon arriving in the Albanian forest, searching tirelessly for the diadem. No hollow tree went unchecked. It scoured nearly the entire forest but found no trace of Ravenclaw's diadem. The most likely conclusion, then, was that the diadem had already been taken by Voldemort. The Basilisk now faced a dilemma: should it inform Dracula that the diadem had been taken by Voldemort? Silently, it compared Dracula and Voldemort in its mind. One was the longtime friend of Salazar Slytherin 1,000 years ago, immensely powerful, and capable of tormenting the Basilisk at will. The other was a distant descendant of Slytherin, Voldemort, whose power seemed decent but had once failed miserably while targeting an infant. As the saying goes, distant kin are no match for close friends. As a descendant of Slytherin over 1,000 years later, it was impossible to know how much of Slytherin's blood still flowed through Voldemort, yet Dracula had genuinely lived over a millennium, always a close companion to the original Slytherin himself. So the basilisk resolved to side with Count Dracula. Of course, it would never admit that it was merely subdued by Dracula's 1,000-year-old torment, nor would it admit that Dracula could probe its memories with legilimency, revealing any attempt to hide the truth. With that thought, the basilisk felt a wave of relief and began aimlessly exploring the forest it would eventually call home. While wandering in the Albanian forest, it happened upon another sizable serpent, a viper named Nagini. The two snakes immediately found a kindred spirit in each other, recognizing the intelligence necessary for meaningful conversation, and quickly formed a bond. As their discussions grew deeper, the basilisk realized just how small the world was. Encountering a single intelligent snake could mean finding one who had also crossed paths with Voldemort, another unfortunate serpent. Deep down loyal to Dracula, the basilisk began strategizing, determined not to let this newly found intelligent snake fall into the hands of a hopeless figure like Voldemort. It began earnestly sharing all sorts of negative stories about Voldemort with Nagini. "Nagini, you don't know this, but I was originally a righteous and noble snake," it hissed with pride. "1,000 years ago, the great Salazar Slytherin left me in Hogwarts Castle, hoping that one day I could aid his descendants and protect the school in times of peril. But the glorious deeds I imagined, those who bring honor to the house and fight for Slytherin, never actually happened. You have no idea what I've endured since." Nagini listened curiously as the nearly 1,000-year-old basilisk recounted its past. "My master misjudged the situation. After Hogwarts began admitting Muggle-borns, it didn't expose itself as he expected, and the school never faced massive Muggle attacks," the basilisk explained. "So I had little chance to act, spending centuries in the darkest of dungeons, sleeping through the ages. Because of the chamber's secrecy, I would go a century or two without seeing a single living soul. Even when a descendant of Slytherin finally found the chamber, they were terrified at the sight of me, never imagining I could offer any real help. My master was great, but his descendants lacked his courage. Few dared release me, even when they did, it was to try controlling a powerful magical creature like me with their petty authority, thinking they could act with impunity in the wizarding world. It was for this reason I went from being a righteous, noble snake to the monster whispered about in the chamber. I spent my long life drifting through time, sleeping a century or two at a stretch, waking only to catch a few rats or insects to stave off hunger, a truly miserable existence. Hundreds of years later, a Slytherin descendant named Corvinus Gaunt saw my plight and improved the chamber magically, giving me a somewhat more respectable environment." Nagini listened intently, gently patting the basilisk's thick body with her tail to comfort it. "But you still haven't spoken about the Dark Lord," she hissed softly. "Why do you think he's such an unreliable villain?" The basilisk nodded, its crimson-tipped head bobbing slightly. "That goes back 60 years. I first encountered the Dark Lord when he was still Tom Riddle, probably only 15 or 16 years old. At that time, I had gone over 100 years without seeing a human. Seeing young Tom Riddle, with his decent looks and polite manners, I thought at last there was a worthy heir among Slytherin's descendants. But I misjudged. Tom Riddle was far from a proper student. Even starting 5th year, he had grown cunning and dark-minded. From our first few words in Parseltongue, he was already scheming grand plans. He misunderstood the intentions of my great master, believing Slytherin despised Muggle-borns and wanted them purged from Hogwarts. Not only that, he was violent-tempered, using Parseltongue to orchestrate countless attacks within Hogwarts. If I hadn't restrained my power, merely glimpsing these students through reflections and water, turning them into stone, the school might have already shut down. But as is often the case, even careful steps falter. Once, I emerged from the chamber and, unaware, locked eyes with a plump young witch. Accidentally, she was killed, and Hogwarts nearly faced closure. And then..." Nagini hissed anxiously. "Did the school actually close?" "No, it didn't. The basilisk's golden eyes shimmered with disdain. That little Riddle was unworthy as Slytherin's heir. He abandoned the pride of his inheritance and pinned the blame on an innocent third-year student. That third-year boy just happened to own an 8-legged giant spider, a repulsive magical creature, so he was expelled from Hogwarts. Nagini hesitated, hissing softly. If that's true, the Dark Lord really is quite despicable. But he's been living in this forest for over a decade. I've often been near him, and I thought he wasn't like that. He's gentle, a good conversationalist, telling many interesting stories. Nagini recalled Voldemort's earlier demeanor. He said he had been betrayed and only barely retained a fragment of his soul to survive in this forest. What nonsense, the basilisk scoffed. Count Dracula told me the truth. Voldemort merely tried to kill a baby who might one day threaten him, failed, and had the killing curse rebound upon himself. With such meager accomplishments, I can hardly believe Slytherin's blood runs in him. Nagini looked puzzled. Rebound on a baby? You're not joking, are you, old sir? I'm not joking, the basilisk hissed. Not long ago, he returned to Hogwarts, trying to steal a stone to restore his power. I was nearly disgusted. He even had the nerve to seek my help. If it weren't for our snake inability to resist Parseltongue, I wouldn't even glance his way. So, did he manage to steal the stone? Nagini asked curiously. No, the basilisk's hiss carried a hint of schadenfreude. Voldemort surely didn't expect to encounter an old friend of his ancestors at Hogwarts. The generational gap was massive. It seemed Nagini still doubted. The basilisk looked at her and said, Nagini, if you still think Voldemort is a gentle, understanding wizard, then we should test him. Later, the scene unfolded with both snakes hiding in a cave after Voldemort arrived. During their time in the Albanian forest, the basilisk had gathered numerous snake allies, its spies spread throughout the woods. Thanks to their intelligence, the basilisk detected Voldemort's presence early and decisively brought Nagini to a hidden cave. Voldemort, wandering the forest twice and growing impatient, having recently recruited many high-ranking Death Eaters, abandoned any pretense of subtlety. He dropped the gentle, understanding tone, using the harshest Parseltongue he could muster, trying to command Nagini to leave her hiding place, intending to turn her into a Horcrux. But he didn't expect the basilisk, using its larger size, to restrain Nagini, preventing her from rushing into Voldemort's trap. Seeing no response to his Parseltongue, Voldemort muttered a curse, assumed Nagini had temporarily left the forest, and operated away. Only after Voldemort left did Nagini regain full control, though still slightly dazed. You see, Nagini, the basilisk hissed, just for a short time away, he would roar at you like that. I tell you, this Voldemort is no good. Nagini nodded, looking at the basilisk with gratitude. Thank you, old sir. Without you, I might not have seen the truth about him for another 12 years. Ah, don't mention it, the basilisk said proudly. It's rare to meet a kindred intelligent creature. Of course, we must work together, rather, we must navigate this together. Voldemort failed to find Nagini, unable to create his sixth Horcrux, leaving him troubled. Equally troubled was Voldemort's Horcrux, the diary. Riddle's diary had long been hidden near Harry Potter, but its main goal to steal Harry's blood had yet to be achieved. In fact, when Voldemort restored the diary Horcrux to him, he had imbued it with some of his soul power, enabling Riddle to set high-level spells around 4 Privet Drive, preventing most owls from delivering letters to Harry. Riddle initially thought the task would be simple. He assumed that by hiding near Harry Potter, finding a quiet night, and using a strong sleeping spell to subdue him, he could cut open Harry's wrist while he slept and easily collect the blood. But Riddle encountered failure the first time. When Harry's blood touched the diary, it acted like concentrated acid, instantly burning a large hole through a blank page. Riddle spent tremendous soul energy repairing it, and had to cast healing spells on Harry simultaneously to avoid arousing suspicion. The second attempt was smarter. He used a glass container, making a small cut in Harry's wrist to collect the blood without the diary itself touching it. As predicted, the blood did not corrode the container. Yet Riddle was not pleased for long. When the blood nearly reached the amount needed for Voldemort's resurrection, an unknown magical force emanated from it, even causing Harry's body to react defensively. Riddle barely managed to return the blood to Harry's veins, expending even more soul energy. From then on, Riddle realized that Harry possessed a mysterious protective power, making wrist-cutting and direct blood collection impossible. Yet Riddle did not give up. He devised a subtler plan. He would stay close to Harry, gradually gaining his trust, eventually leading Harry to deliver his own blood to Voldemort, helping him achieve true resurrection. Thus, Harry gained a patient, friendly, highly capable magical mentor, and even achieved first place in the defense against the dark arts final exam. When Harry returned to the Dursleys, all his magical items including Riddle's diary were locked away. Riddle, however, did not despair. On the contrary, he was overjoyed. Recalling his own childhood in the orphanage, he projected that Harry, facing neglect from his relatives, would yearn for a friend who could empathize and share his hardships. He used protective and jinxing spells to prevent Harry from receiving letters from friends, leaving him utterly lonely. Then, before Harry's birthday, Riddle emerged from the cupboard where he had been hiding. "Don't worry, Harry," Riddle wrote in the diary, "I may not have the power to take you away, but I can give you a good idea. First, we must ensure that all the suffering you've endured is fully avenged." Riddle recalled his own experiences in the orphanage, wanting a companion who could empower him to take revenge on those who had bullied him. He assumed Harry would feel the same, seeking vengeance on the Dursleys to gain his trust. But he was gravely mistaken. Harry Potter was fundamentally kind-hearted, loving, and able to find luck in misfortune. He abhorred deadly, evil curses like the killing curse from the bottom of his heart. Thus, Harry never used the killing curse as Voldemort had imagined, maintaining his true character. Moreover, he began to distrust the diary, no longer confiding in it as before. When Harry was later whisked away by Ron, Fred, and George in a flying car, Riddle realized matters were getting out of control. Chapter 101, Chapter 101, The Car Accident Harry and Ron Couldn't Escape. Chapter 101, The Car Accident Harry and Ron Couldn't Escape. Harry had spent a month living in the hut, almost entirely ignoring the diary he once treasured. Riddle grew increasingly anxious, but the start of the new school year drew ever closer. If Harry returned to Hogwarts, he would once again be under the watchful eyes of Dumbledore and Dracula, making it far more difficult to acquire Harry's blood. "No, I can't remain idle any longer." The diary's Riddle silently made up his mind, preparing to take action. Harry felt the summer had passed far too quickly. He looked forward to returning to Hogwarts, yet the month spent at the hut had been no less enjoyable than his time at school, arguably some of the happiest days of his life. Thinking about the Dursleys and how he might be treated next time he returned to Privet Drive, he couldn't help but feel envious of his friend Ron, who had such a warm and loving family. On the last evening before their departure, Mrs. Weasley used cooking magic to prepare a lavish feast, filled with all of Harry's favorite dishes, culminating in a mouth-watering honey pudding for dessert. Fred and George had crafted 2 homemade fireworks, planning a grand display at the final dinner before school started. The dazzling explosions made the night all the more perfect. The twins earned praise from everyone except Percy and Harry, and Ron privately admired their ingenuity, confident that before graduation, these two would achieve their goal of creating fireworks powerful enough to engulf Hogwarts Castle. After enjoying themselves, the wizards at the hut each had a cup of hot chocolate and then fell into deep sleep. The next morning, the rooster in the yard crowed on schedule, serving as Mrs. Weasley's alarm. At the sound of the crow, she called everyone to wake, yet they still scrambled, as if there were countless tasks to complete before leaving. Mrs. Weasley ran about, fetching spare bedding and clothes for Ginny, preparing snacks and lunch for the returning Weasley brothers, gradually becoming more flustered and irritated. In the narrow stairwell, they constantly bumped into one another. Fred had only partially dressed, George held a leftover piece of bread, Ron struggled with his trousers, and Harry hurried upstairs to retrieve a forgotten textbook. Once everything was almost ready, Mr. Weasley attempted to carry Ginny's trunk to the car, only to trip over a rogue Quidditch ball in the yard, nearly breaking his neck. Ugh, how did a Quidditch ball get in front of the garage? Mr. Weasley gasped, clutching his neck and glaring at Fred and George. Fred, George, didn't you leave this ball lying around after practice? We didn't, Dad. Fred replied. Not us, Dad. George echoed. Seeing his father's growing irritation, Fred decided to pass the blame. He glanced at the proud rooster standing nearby, eyes gleaming with an idea. Dad, I think this chicken kicked the Quidditch ball here, he said. George immediately understood and added, yet. Muggle chickens can play basketball, so why can't our magical chickens play Quidditch? At the mention of a Muggle game, Mr. Weasley forgot his pain and eagerly stood upright. Basketball, with a ball in a hoop? That's a Muggle sport. Harry had to serve as an interpreter, explaining the rules of basketball to his father. Stop researching basketball and Quidditch balls. We're almost late. Mrs. Weasley's urgency snapped him back to reality. Mr. Weasley hastily put Ginny's trunk into the old Ford Anglia's trunk. With the use of an undetectable extension charm, 6 large trunks, 2 owl cages, and a rat cage were all packed simultaneously, leaving even some extra space. Don't tell Molly, Mr. Weasley whispered to Harry, proudly opening the trunk to show him the result. Finally, once everything was packed and they were seated in the car, Mrs. Weasley glanced at the back row in surprise. Harry, Ron, Fred, George, and Percy all sat comfortably side by side, while she and Ginny occupied the front passenger seat. The seats had been magically lengthened to resemble a wide park bench. Muggles are smarter than we imagined, she said, impressed. You can't even tell from the outside how spacious it is inside. Hearing her praise, Mr. Weasley felt slightly embarrassed and quickly started the engine. The car hummed and drove out of the yard. Harry cast one last nostalgic glance at the quirky house, wondering when he would see it again. Meanwhile, George had forgotten his fireworks at home. 10 minutes later, the screech of brakes signaled the car stopping again, so Fred could retrieve his flying broom. By the time they set off again, it was quite late, and Mrs. Weasley looked as if smoke were about to come out of her ears from anger. Mr. Weasley checked his watch and glanced at his wife. Molly, my dear. No, Arthur, Mrs. Weasley interrupted, anticipating his words. There's a little button I installed, the invisible booster. It can lift us into the sky and take us to King's Cross Station in 10 minutes. No one would know. Mr. Weasley explained. I said no, Arthur. Not out in the open like this. Mrs. Weasley firmly refused. Thus, the Ford Anglia was stuck in traffic with other families taking their children to school. By the time the Weasleys and Harry finally reached King's Cross Station, platform 9 3/4 was empty. They were the last group of young wizards to arrive. Mrs. Weasley nervously checked the hanging clock on the wall separating platforms 9 and 10. 5 minutes to 11. The train would depart in 5 minutes. They had to pass through the wall in a casual, unnoticeable way to avoid drawing Muggle attention. Don't worry, Mum, Fred said cheerfully. We're just in time. Percy went first, quickly disappearing through the wall. Mr. Weasley led Fred and George behind him. I'll take Ginny, Mrs. Weasley said to Harry and Ron. You've done this before, so just follow behind. She grabbed Ginny's hand and vanished. Let's go together. Only a minute left, Ron said, glancing at the clock with determination. Harry nodded, checking that Hedwig's cage was securely on the trolley before confidently pushing it toward the wall. It was far easier than using Floo powder, and he felt no hesitation. They pressed their bodies to the wall and began pushing the trolley faster. Bang, crash, clatter. The trolleys bounced off the wall, Ron's trunk slammed to the ground, and Hedwig's cage toppled, sliding across the shiny floor. Hedwig screeched angrily. Their odd behavior drew the attention of the surrounding crowd, and station guards rushed over. "What are you two boys doing?" a frustrated guard demanded. If I said the trolley slipped from our hands, would you believe it?" Harry said awkwardly, holding his ribs as he got up. Ron ran to pick up Hedwig, who flapped and squawked, angering the crowd. "You're confining a creature that longs for freedom," a middle-aged Muggle woman with an animal protection badge scolded. "But Hedwig's a pet," Ron argued. "Lies," the woman shouted. "In all my years with animals, I've never seen an owl kept as a pet." Harry and Ron ignored her. Normally, they might argue, but now there were only 20 seconds left before the train departed. Harry pressed himself against the wall. The wall was solid and unmoving. "We're going to miss the train," Ron said, pushing the trolley against the wall. "I don't understand why the passage sealed itself." Harry looked at the clock, feeling dizzy with anxiety. 5, 4. He gritted his teeth, stepped back, and slammed into the wall with a bang. "Ouch!" he cried, clutching his head. "Done for," Ron muttered as the second hand passed 12. "What if Mum and Dad can't come for us?" Harry barely heard him, nursing a growing bump on his head. "That poor boy has a problem," the animal protection woman muttered, shaking her head at Harry's collision. She gestured for a station medic. "Harry, is that your diary?" Ron suddenly asked, pointing to the floor. "Did it fall from your trunk?" Harry looked in surprise and saw Tom's blank diary, now open with faint writing appearing. "Tom," he whispered, shielding it from Ron. The diary displayed a line of text. "Harry, if you feel troubled, I know a way to help you return to Hogwarts." Harry's expression shifted from worry to delight, though he had no quill to respond. The diary seemed to understand and continued without waiting for him to ask. "I can make a key. If you need, I can craft a door key to Hogwarts for you." Riddle's plan was already set. As Harry neared the wall between platforms 9 and 10, he would be stopped by a tampered barrier. Harry, who considered Hogwarts his home, would never accept being unable to return. Riddle could then offer the door key, gaining Harry's trust. Of course, the key would not lead to Hogwarts. It would take him straight to the Riddle house and the Riddle graveyard, directly into Voldemort's hands. Voldemort could then have Death Eaters collect Harry's blood and use the remains of Tom Riddle along with a servant's flesh to complete his resurrection. If Riddle had a mouth, he would have laughed uncontrollably at the perfection of his plan. "A door key." Harry read the diary's words, turning to Ron. "Do you know what a door key is?" "Why suddenly ask, Harry?" Ron was surprised. "Door keys require ministry approval. We can't just use one to get back to Hogwarts." Harry's eyes brightened. "Just tell me what it is. Maybe we can find one." "Oh, a door key is a convenient transport device, a bit like flow powder," Ron explained. "But honestly, we're unlikely to ever find one." Hearing Ron compare it to flow powder, Harry shivered, recalling the last time he misused flow powder and ran into that evil hag in Nocturne Alley. He instinctively recoiled at the thought of the diary's key. "I think we should wait by the car first," Harry said, noticing medics approaching. "Only consider the key if absolutely necessary." "Harry!" Ron suddenly leapt up. "The car? What is it?" Harry asked, startled. "We can fly the car to Hogwarts," Ron said excitedly. "But I thought..." Harry hesitated. "We're trapped, right? We have to get to school, yes? In an emergency, young wizards can use magic. The Restriction Act, Clause 19, or something, Fred and George had evidently told him. Harry ignored the rules. He just wanted to get back to Hogwarts. "You can drive it." Harry's hesitation vanished, replaced by excitement. "No problem. Ron said, turning the trolley toward the exit. Let's go. If we hurry, we can catch the Hogwarts Express. They bypassed the medics and curious onlookers, reaching the old Ford Anglia parked nearby, leaving Riddle stranded in Harry's backpack. Across the calm, reflective surface of the Black Lake, against the dark horizon, Hogwarts turrets and towers loomed atop the cliffs. The castle was alight, countless candles floating midair, illuminating the 4 tables and casting golden plates and goblets in shimmering light. The ceiling, charmed, reflected the starry night outside. Professor McGonagall, her hair tightly bound in a bun, placed a new sorting hat on a first-year's stool. Dracula held a goblet, gently swirling its contents, observing the awe and surprise of the young wizards, pleased with his creation. However, not all were impressed by Dracula's handiwork. His gaze fell on the 2 red-haired twins, who showed no interest in the sorting hat. Annoyed by their insolence, Dracula lowered his goblet and glared at them. But the usually mischievous Fred and George paid him no mind, even refraining from setting up a bet as they often did with the wealthy Slytherins. The twins were distracted, clearly worried. What's with these 2 today? Dracula frowned. Just as he contemplated approaching them, a muffled explosion echoed through the castle. The professors awaiting the sorting ceremony looked up in surprise, instinctively turning their heads northeast. Chapter 102, Chapter 102, The Flying Car Comes to Life. Chapter 102, The Flying Car Comes to Life. A sudden thud startled all the professors. Has Hogwarts been attacked? Are there Death Eaters breaking in? Compared to the professors' shock, the young witches and wizards in the hall were even more alarmed. Soon, the entire Great Hall descended into chaos. Professor McGonagall, holding the brand new sorting hat, frowned and shouted. Silence! Gradually, the hall quieted down. The first years, on edge, stood on one side of the hall, unsure of what was happening. There's no danger in Hogwarts Castle at the moment. Everyone, please stay calm. The sorting ceremony will proceed as planned. McGonagall's words tried to reassure the students, while she subtly glanced at Dumbledore. Dumbledore understood at once, smiling slightly. He turned to Snape and said, Severus, could you check what's happening outside? Snape nodded, about to rise, when Dracula beat him to it. I'll go. Dracula said cheerfully. Watching the sorting ceremony a second time is hardly exciting. Maybe I'll find some fun outside. Before Dumbledore could react, Dracula drained his goblet of wine, straightened his robes, and leapt down from the professor's dais. I'll go with you. Snape followed closely, descending from the platform and walking alongside Dracula toward the Great Hall doors. Dracula glanced at Snape and noticed his eyes kept darting toward the Gryffindor table. Professor Snape seems rather concerned about Gryffindor, doesn't he? Dracula asked lightly. Not at all. Snape replied, withdrawing his gaze. The way he gritted his teeth made it look as though he was speaking through clenched jaws. I merely have an issue with the house that stole the Slytherin cup. Dracula's curiosity piqued as he looked at where Snape's gaze lingered the longest on a flustered Hermione Granger, with the 2 adjacent seats empty. Then he thought of Fred and George's unusual behavior, and a glint of understanding appeared in his eyes. Have Harry Potter and Ronald Weasley not arrived yet? Dracula mused, a smile creeping onto his face. This is getting interesting. He quickened his pace, moving almost like flying, overtaking Snape and heading straight toward the source of the earlier thud. Snape's lips twitched at Dracula's speed and hastened his own steps. His long cloak swayed behind him, giving him the appearance of a giant bat. From afar, Dracula saw a frenzied willow tree, an unusually violent whomping willow. This tree had stood at Hogwarts for decades. At this moment, it was swinging its thick and thin branches wildly, raining down blows on a battered, old car. Countless twig-like branches, like knuckled fingers, pounded on the windshield like hail. One branch, as thick as a battering ram, smashed against the roof, while nimble willow leaves reached into the shattered windows, attempting to strike the two young wizards inside. The tree is vicious. We need to get out of here. Ron shouted from inside the car, pushing the door with all his strength. But just then, a branch snuck in through the broken window and delivered a brutal uppercut to Ron, sending him crashing onto Harry's lap. Stunned, Ron watched as the roof slowly buckled under the onslaught of the giant branches. "We're doomed," he groaned, staring at the collapsing roof. At the critical moment, the underside of the Ford Anglia trembled, the engine roared back to life. "Reverse!" Harry shouted, hope rekindled. The car shot backward with a whoosh. The whomping willow, still intent on its attack, strained to reach the retreating car with its longest branches, nearly cracking its trunk and groaning at its roots under the effort. "Merlin, that was close!" Ron panted, lying across Harry's lap once they were out of reach. "Well done, car!" But the Ford seemed to have reached its limit. With two sudden pop sounds, the doors flung open. The seats tilted sideways, kicking Harry and Ron out onto the damp ground. Two more thuds sent their luggage flying from the trunk in the same manner. In a small mercy, Hedwig's cage wasn't slammed to the ground but tossed gently into the air. The cage opened mid-flight, allowing Hedwig to fly off toward the castle, screeching in anger. After these motions, the battered Ford, its roof nearly caved in, steamed and rumbled forward into the darkness, its tail lights flashing angrily. "No! You can't leave!" Ron shouted, flailing the broken wand he had just snapped in the crash. "Come back! My dad will kill me if I lose the car!" To Ron's surprise, the car stopped. The tail light grew brighter, moving closer to Ron's side. "Yes, yes, just like that. Back to me," Ron exhaled in relief. "Ron, something's not right with the car." Harry held his suitcase, watching the car closely. The Ford hovered above the ground, its tail lights flashing angrily, wheels spinning rapidly, invisible boosters stirring the soft grass behind it. Harry and Ron's hair whipped violently in the wind. "It's struggling," Ron said uncertainly. "That's what it looks like," Harry nodded. "Could it be that it can't disobey its owner and is only responding to you?" "Stop joking, Harry," Ron replied. "My dad's the owner." Even as the car struggled, it eventually stopped in front of the bewildered Harry and Ron. Seemingly realizing resistance was futile, the Ford powered down, extinguishing its lights, and collapsed to the ground with a heavy clatter from doors, trunk, and hood. "By the blistering!" A voice suddenly sounded behind Harry and Ron, making them jump. Harry froze and turned toward a figure almost blending into the darkness, a pair of crimson eyes gleaming in the night. Seeing those eyes, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Professor Dracula, you scared us to death." Dracula ignored them, examining the battered Ford with bright, curious eyes. "Is this the car Mr. Weasley modified?" he asked Ron. "Ah, yes." Ron stammered nervously. "Did something happen to it?" "No problem at all. It's in excellent condition now." Dracula laughed. Harry and Ron looked at the battered Ford and then back at Dracula, suspicion on their faces. "I don't know whether to believe him," they thought. "Truly amazing. Such a simple magically modified car accidentally developed a faint consciousness," Dracula continued, examining it. "Are you upset that I brought you back?" he asked the car. "Has the professor lost his mind?" Ron whispered to Harry. Harry nodded in agreement, worry etched across his face. "Even Professor Dracula seems to have lost it. This world is too crazy." At that moment, the Ford's lights blinked, as if responding. "Don't worry, I won't harm you," Dracula said lightly. "Even if it's just a slight instinctual awareness, it's remarkable." He ran his hand along the car's hood, roof, windows, and trunk. With each touch, dents, scratches, and damage automatically repaired themselves. Gradually, the Ford looked brand new. I couldn't determine how your faint consciousness formed, so I didn't repair your internal components, Dracula explained. If you want me to fix the inside too, blink your lights twice. The Ford blinked once, just enough to indicate that exterior repairs were sufficient. Good. I'll leave a mark on you to track your position, then you're free to go, Dracula said. If you agree, blink your lights once. The Ford blinked again. Smart, Dracula nodded approvingly, drawing a mark shaped like demon wings inside the car. A red glow appeared briefly before fading. All done. You may leave. Dracula patted the restored windows. The Ford's engine roared as it shot into the air, turning to face Dracula, giving a little nod before racing off toward the forbidden forest, its tail lights disappearing into the night. Harry and Ron stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend the conversation between Professor and Carr, thinking even in the magical world, this was absurd. It wasn't until the tail lights vanished that Ron suddenly snapped out of it. Professor, we can't just let it go, he shouted. My dad will kill me if I lose the car. You are his son. He won't kill you, Dracula said, glancing at Ron. At most, he might give you a beating. A near-death beating is possible, though. Ron's face fell. Great, the car's gone. What do I do now? He murmured. Professor, could you think of a way? Can you not let the Weasley car just leave? Harry asked hesitantly. You saw what happened. This car developed a faint consciousness from your actions. I wanted to observe it a little longer, Dracula shrugged. Then, realizing letting someone else's property go wasn't quite right, he added, fine. I'll cover your loss. Give me your address. A new car will arrive tomorrow. Ron immediately brightened, giving Dracula his home address in relief. Dracula noted it down, finally turning his full attention to Harry and Ron. Since the car issue is settled, care to explain why you didn't take the Hogwarts Express and instead drove yourselves? Dracula asked with a cold smile. Were you looking for excitement and fun? At the words exciting and fun, Dracula's expression suddenly brightened with interest. Harry trembled, noticing the professor's sudden curiosity. He could swear Dracula was thinking about getting one for himself while sending a new one to the Weasleys. Ron also quietly relaxed. After a year at Hogwarts, students had learned that if they piqued Dracula's interest, he would become unusually approachable. Looks like we've passed the Dracula test, Harry and Ron exchanged relieved glances. However, their relief was short-lived. Another slimy, unpleasant voice rang from behind them. Long time no see, the famous Harry Potter, and his companion, Weasley. Harry and Ron froze, turning to see a large hooked nose and greasy hair draped over the shoulders of the man approaching. Snape was panting, having rushed from the southwest hall to the east near the Whomping Willow. Even out of breath, his malicious smile made it clear that Harry and Ron were in deep trouble. Gee, good evening, Professor Snape, Harry said, forcing a smile that looked worse than crying. Evening is not good, Potter, Snape said coldly. I see that the very precious Whomping Willow has sustained significant damage. The damage it caused us was far worse than what we did to it. Ron blurted out. Silence. Snape snapped. You two, come with me. He looked at the boxes in their hands, now clearly amused. It's a pity you aren't students of my house, or I'd expel you outright, without even letting you pack your things. Harry and Ron looked at Dracula, helplessly hoping for rescue. But Dracula, intrigued by the Whomping Willow, stood under its snapped branches, examining the violent tree without a glance at the boys. They noticed that the normally furious tree became obedient, almost gentle, under Dracula's presence, letting him straighten the broken branches without resistance. What are you two standing there for? Snape urged. Seeing Dracula had no intention of helping them, Harry and Ron gloomily followed Snape back toward Hogwarts Castle. Chapter 103, Chapter 103, The Howler. Chapter 103, The Howler. After the sorting ceremony ended, Professor Sprout finished gathering the tools she would need for treating plants and approached the Whomping Willow. "Oh, poor little willow. It has suffered such a terrible blow," she said, covering her mouth in sympathy as she looked at the large patch of bark that had been stripped off and the scattered whomping willow branches lying on the ground. Dracula was standing beneath the tree as well, turning his gaze toward Professor Sprout. "To be honest, Professor Sprout, this whomping willow probably needs to take a break from losing its temper," Dracula said with a shrug. "Actually, only that patch of bark that was knocked off was caused by those two little troublemakers, Potter and Weasley. The branches on the ground were mostly the tree itself." "The tree did this to itself?" Professor Sprout looked puzzled. "Yes," Dracula replied. "After it was hit by that little car, it might have been in a bad mood and went wild, smashing its branches at the sky, the ground, and even the car. But its wood isn't very sturdy. After smashing like that for a while, it ended up like this." "Well, you have to admit, this species of whomping willow does get easily agitated," Professor Sprout said, walking toward the tree. "But if anyone had been hit that hard for no reason, even I'd be angry." "True," Dracula chuckled. "But if I were the whomping willow, I wouldn't let myself go completely berserk without at least targeting its opponent's weakness first. If it were me, I'd smash the car windows, then use a couple of thicker branches to restrain the whole car and block the doors. Then whoever's inside would be completely at my mercy," he added, smiling with mild interest. Professor Sprout froze for a moment, shivering slightly at the thought. Thankfully, the whomping willow was a bit of a fool and didn't target weaknesses otherwise. Those two little rascals, Harry and Ron, wouldn't have stood a chance. "Ahem. Professor Dracula, do you even know the whomping willow's weakness?" She quickly changed the subject, avoiding any further discussion about effective ways to attack. "It seems calm enough now. Does it even have a weakness?" Dracula raised an eyebrow. "I never noticed one. Whenever it sees me, it doesn't get angry, so I've never needed to learn it." Professor Sprout pinched the bridge of her nose. She quietly approached the whomping willow and jumped up, pressing her hand against a knot on one of the branches. Despite her short height, she could jump high enough. She'd clearly practiced specifically to manage this tree. The effect was immediate. The whomping willow, still swaying lightly, instantly became motionless, looking just like a regular willow tree. "Quite an interesting tree," Dracula said with a light chuckle, watching Professor Sprout's actions. "But I do have a question. Since you have to get close to the whomping willow to touch its weakness, what if the tree is already in a furious state? A wizard who could get close doesn't need to know the weakness, while a wizard who wants to find the weakness can't get near it. So, the weakness is kind of pointless, isn't it?" Professor Sprout's face stiffened. "Seems that way," she muttered, scratching her head. "Unless someone can hit that knot precisely from outside the tree's attack range using a spell or small stone, and even then, it's not guaranteed the knot will be pressed. No, next time I teach about the whomping willow, I'll make sure to tell those mischievous students to stay far away from an enraged tree. They mustn't think knowing its weakness means they can handle it easily." While muttering, Professor Sprout busily pulled out various plant healing supplies, tending to the broken branches and the damaged bark to protect the tree's vulnerable spots from insects. Dracula shrugged casually, walking back toward the castle. He guessed that Harry and Ron had probably already been punished by either Snape or McGonagall. But he wasn't worried about their future at all. Dumbledore intended to train Harry to be a key force against Voldemort. So naturally, the two boys wouldn't be expelled, and since it was just the start of the term, no points would be deducted either. Dracula figured that, given the carefree nature of Gryffindor students, Harry and Ron driving a car to school without even losing points might even make them heroes. And indeed, Dracula's prediction proved correct. News that Harry and Ron had arrived at school in a flying car spread quickly. Except for Percy and Hermione, the Gryffindor students were thrilled, feeling that it was an exciting and prestigious event. When the heroes reached the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, the fat lady portrait had just swung open, and the common room erupted with thunderous applause. Every Gryffindor student was awake, packed into the circular common room waiting for them. Many hands reached out from behind the portrait, dragging Harry and Ron in. Hermione, who had escorted them back, had to squeeze herself in alone. "This is amazing," shouted their roommate, Lee Jordan. "Incredible. Driving a flying car into the Whomping Willow. This will be talked about at Hogwarts for years." "Well done," said a fifth-year student who had never spoken to Harry. Others patted Harry and Ron on the back, as if they had just won a marathon. Fred and George pushed through the crowd to meet them, speaking in unison, "Why didn't you call us back? That's not fair." Ron's face flushed as he smiled proudly among the crowd. Percy, the most upright of them all, tried to push through the excited students to scold them but couldn't get close. After a couple of minutes, Percy finally approached, and Harry elbowed Ron, nodding toward him. Ron immediately understood. "Yawn, time to go upstairs," Ron said, feigning exhaustion. "It's been a long day of flying." Harry did the same, moving toward the stairs leading to their dormitory, pretending to be utterly exhausted. "Good night," Harry called to Hermione, who, like Percy, kept a stern face. They finally squeezed to the other end of the common room, still being patted on the back by some students. The stairs led to a secluded area outside their dorm. They entered their familiar circular room, seeing the 5 four-poster beds with red velvet again and the tall, narrow windows. Their trunks had been magically moved to the head of the beds by house elves. Ron exhaled, a little embarrassed as he smiled at Harry. "I know we shouldn't feel proud of this, but..." The door suddenly burst open. Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Neville Longbottom charged in. They were the other Gryffindor second-year boys. "Unbelievable! You really flew here in a car." Seamus gave a thumbs up. "Cool!" Dean exclaimed. "That's amazing!" Even the normally timid Neville looked impressed. "Unbelievable, amazing," they practically ran through every common word for shock. Harry couldn't help but laugh proudly with Ron. Of course, their pride didn't last long. The next morning at breakfast, Harry and Ron felt a bit uneasy. Harry shakily lifted his bowl to sip his porridge. Overhead, the sound of flapping wings erupted, and hundreds of owls streamed in through the hall windows, dropping letters and packages into the crowd below. Dracula, unusually present for breakfast, frowned at the chaos. "I still don't understand why Hogwarts lets owls deliver mail during meals," he said to Professor Flitwick, who was sitting across from him. "If their dirty feathers fall into the food, how can we eat?" "Well, meal times are when all the students are together," Flitwick said nonchalantly, floating a feather that was about to land on his head elsewhere. "Especially on the first day of term, many careless students forget to collect their mail." Dracula, feeling annoyed, set down his blood pudding, losing his appetite, and studied the reactions of professors and students around him. Snape, clearly unhappy that Harry and Ron hadn't been expelled or even docked points, was staring intently at the Gryffindor table, scheming how to make the boys suffer. Then, a splash of grey-white liquid landed squarely on Snape's plate. Snape froze, moving his gaze from the Gryffindor table to his plate. "Ah, Severus, looks like you've won the lottery," Professor Ketleben said, seizing the opportunity to tease. "Do you want me to explain? That's owl droppings. You can tell this one caught a mouse last night." "Enough." Snape gritted his teeth, gripping his wand as though restraining himself from unleashing a massacre on the owl. Watching him storm off, Ketleben muttered, "Youngsters are always so impulsive and careless." Other professors glanced at each other, thinking, "Professor Ketleben, after over 60 detentions, aren't you the most careless of all?" The owl delivery chaos wasn't limited to the professor's table. A grey owl, seemingly drunk, toppled into Hermione's milk jug. Milk and feathers splashed all over Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Eeyore! Ron cried, rushing to lift the drenched owl from the jug and placing it on the table. The owl's legs were stiff in the air, holding a soaked red envelope in its beak. Oh no! Ron buried his face in his hands. Don't worry, Ron, it's still alive, Hermione said, tapping the unconscious owl gently. The owl's claws twitched, showing signs of life. I'm used to Eeyore being like this, Ron said sadly. I'm worried about that. He pointed at the red envelope. Harry and Hermione looked at the seemingly ordinary envelope in confusion. Ron and Neville, however, recoiled as if it might explode. What's wrong with this letter? Harry asked. Ron was focused entirely on the envelope, sweat beading on his forehead. At this moment, the four corners of the envelope began to smoke, and it started to swell from within. Hurry, open it, Neville urged. Only a few minutes left, or it will explode even louder. Ron took a deep breath and shouted, Fred! George! Help! The twins, curious, looked over, followed by a group of Gryffindor students. Wow! You didn't disappoint us, Ron! Fred said, patting his brother's shoulder. We knew it. You're definitely our brother, George added with a wide grin. There's no time. Think fast. Ron almost cried, pleading, when you picked up Harry on Privet Drive, didn't you say you learned a spell to deal with howlers? Now's the time. First of all, that spell is the disarming charm, George said, raising a finger. We don't know any other howler handling spells. Okay, hurry. Ron's voice cracked with desperation. Second, Fred added, showing two fingers, the disarming charm only hides the wizard's location from the owl. Your howler has already arrived, so it's useless. Finally, George added, holding up three fingers, you forgot? We never actually learned the disarming charm. Ron stared at them, lips quivering. Then why explain all that useless stuff first? At that moment, the red envelope swelled to its limit. Eeyore couldn't hold it in his beak anymore. Harry quickly retrieved it and handed it to Ron. Thanks, Harry, you really are a good brother, Ron said, gritting his teeth. The next moment, the envelope exploded with a bang, covering Ron's hand and face in bright red as it hovered midair. The envelope's seal had been blown open, its opening gaping like a ferocious mouth. Neville quickly stuffed his fingers in his ears and dove under the Gryffindor table. Wasn't the explosion supposed to be the end? Harry asked, confused. Then he understood. A booming voice filled the great hall, shaking dust from the ceiling. You stole the car. If they expel you, I wouldn't be surprised. Do you have any idea what your father and I felt when we discovered it missing? Dracula, having just regained a bit of appetite, jumped at the howler's roar. His exceptional hearing made the experience unbearable, as if a dozen bombs were detonating near his ears. Couldn't we just have breakfast in peace? He casually tossed his spoon back onto the plate, stood coldly, and raised his hand toward the Gryffindor table. Milk from Hermione's jug floated up and instantly formed a protective barrier around Harry and Ron. The hall fell silent. Yet the two boys' faces instantly turned purple. Chapter 104, Chapter 104, How do you improve defense against the dark arts? Obviously by fighting. Chapter 104, How do you improve defense against the dark arts? Obviously by fighting. This is much quieter now. Dracula leaned back in his chair, settling comfortably. He lifted the blood pudding again, savoring the dessert while watching Harry and Ron with great interest, enjoying the sight of the two young wizards' pained expressions. After quite some time, the red screaming letter finally stopped its yelling and fell to the ground, igniting as it curled into ash. The milk-formed barrier also collapsed, soaking both Ron and Harry entirely. Yet they seemed oblivious, standing dumbly as if a herd of huge rhinoceroses had trampled their faces, both now sporting purple, swollen visages. Are you two okay? Hermione, who had already cleared the area with a cleaning charm, looked at Ron and Harry worriedly. Sorry, Hermione, what did you say? Ron asked hoarsely. I feel like my brain is buzzing, I can't hear anything. What were you two talking about? Harry's voice was equally hoarse. Watching Ron and Hermione moving their lips but producing no sound, he muttered, I think I might be deaf now. I can't hear a thing. Because they couldn't hear, their voices naturally grew louder, shattering the rare silence in the Great Hall. Draco Malfoy, sitting at the Slytherin table, couldn't help but laugh at the sight of their purple faces. Crabbe and Goyle, following his lead, laughed as well, and soon laughter spread from the Slytherin table to Ravenclaw, and finally even the Gryffindor students joined in. But Harry and Ron felt no shame at being laughed at, they couldn't hear a thing. The two simply stared at each other blankly, their minds still buzzing. It wasn't until Professor McGonagall walked down from the staff seats and handed out class schedules along the Gryffindor table, casually casting a charm on them, that they finally regained their senses. Professor, can I ask who cast that milk barrier just now? Ron, fully aware again, was ready to seek revenge. I want to find out who's so immoral, trapping us with Mum's screaming letter. Harry nodded in agreement. The echo inside that barrier was huge. Mrs. Weasley's roar must have bounced around 1,000 times, I even feel like it's still circling inside my head. McGonagall handed them each a schedule, then looked at Harry and Ron with an expression slightly different from her usual sternness, more curious than serious. If I told you who cast the charm, what would you do? She asked. Would you try to get revenge? Absolutely. Ron said fiercely. One cannot leave a grudge unpaid. Harry stood beside him, somewhat agreeing, but sensing something off, he stayed silent, choosing to observe. McGonagall seemed to suppress a smile. She nodded at Ron and pointed toward the front of the Great Hall. Harry and Ron followed her gesture and saw a silver-haired professor casually enjoying his pudding. The one who put you in that protective barrier is right there, McGonagall said. You may go seek revenge now, Weasley. Ah, so it was Professor Dracula who cast the barrier. Ron gave a very awkward smile. It must have been a misunderstanding. Yes, definitely a misunderstanding. Professor Dracula was just worried about our safety and protected us. Sensing their gaze, Professor Dracula looked up, thought for a moment, and curled his lips into a small smirk. His words, carried clearly across the distance, reached Ron's ear. Weasley, for the first 2 weeks of term, your homework load will be the same as Potter's. Ron froze, then furrowed his brow in confusion. McGonagall shot him a glance, apparently trusting that Dracula's authority would prevent them from causing further trouble. She then turned to continue distributing schedules to the other students. What's wrong, Ron? Harry asked, noticing his friend's puzzled expression. Harry, Dracula just told me my homework for the first 2 weeks should match yours, Ron whispered, scratching his head. But we aren't in the same year. Shouldn't our assignments already be the same? Lowering his voice further, he added, do you think Professor Dracula might be a little confused? Why would you say that? Harry carefully glanced at Dracula, who had returned to eating his pudding, paying no attention to the Gryffindor table. I heard from Fred and George that no matter the year, the defense against the dark arts professor is always a bit problematic, Ron whispered. I mean, the time he talked to a car, sure, the car seemed to respond, but homework? That doesn't make sense. Can his assignments really be double mine? At this, Harry fell silent. Do you get it, Harry? Ron pressed when Harry didn't answer. Ron, Harry took a deep breath, his expression serious as he patted Ron's shoulder, I have some bad news. My homework really is double yours. After a joyful week at the Weasleys, combined with the thrill of driving to school, Harry had almost forgotten. Only when Ron mentioned homework did he suddenly remember Professor Dracula had doubled his workload for the first 2 weeks of term. Ron. The first day of school was a Wednesday. This year, Dracula's first lesson was for the 6th year students. 6th year classes were the Defense Against the Dark Arts Advanced Course, Ultimate Wizard Level Exam. The advanced course was no longer separated by house, all 4 houses were in the same classroom. Since only a few students had chosen the class, having all 4 houses together didn't feel crowded. When Dracula arrived, students wearing the 4 house colors were already neatly seated in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. He instinctively glanced at the desk and realized he had forgotten his teaching notes, textbooks, and even the class roster. Dracula then remembered, with some frustration, that the diligent assistant, Gilderoy Lockhart, had died 6 months ago. "You are 6th year students, correct?" he sighed and asked casually. "Yes, Professor," a red-haired boy in the front row replied politely. "Good, understood. Since you are all 6th years, I assume you have all passed the standard wizard level Defense Against the Dark Arts exam." "Yes, Professor," Percy said proudly, holding his head high. Percy Weasley had earned 12 certificates in the standard wizard level exam, a feat rarely achieved. But Dracula didn't care about Percy, nor the mostly top-performing Ravenclaw students. His gaze fell on a few gloomy Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs sitting quietly in the corner. "If I am correct, some of you didn't pass the standard wizard level exam, right?" Dracula said coldly, smiling at the corner students who sat like frightened quails. Percy glanced at them and raised his hand. "Professor, you usually don't assign much homework, so students without self-discipline easily lose focus and naturally fail," he reasoned. Dracula's expression stiffened. "So I suggest, Professor, you could assign more homework," Percy began, only to be interrupted by a Ravenclaw girl. "Professor, Percy didn't mean that, he just wants more homework for himself," Penelope Clearwater said. She had to step in to save Percy. Otherwise, his words could have easily offended most of the class and even Dracula himself. Being targeted by Dracula's temper could make Percy's life miserable. "Percy Weasley," Dracula said, staring deeply at the red-haired boy, his lips curling into a cold arc, "do you think there is a problem with my teaching methods?" The classroom seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. Percy shivered all over. Actually, I was just speaking carelessly, Professor," he muttered. "But you have a point, Weasley," Dracula continued coldly. "Since so many failed the standard exam, it shows that my teaching methods may indeed have flaws." The student's eyes widened in fear, then turned angrily toward Percy. If not for this meddlesome boy, who knows when Dracula would have reflected on his teaching method, Percy had indirectly triggered it. "Don't be so quick to panic," Dracula said, suddenly chuckling. "Even if some of you fail, I still won't assign useless piles of homework. Your homework will be as it should be." The students looked confused but slightly hopeful. But the hope quickly turned to fear. Defense Against the Dark Arts is a subject best learned through practice. Paper assignments cannot truly improve your skills, Dracula said, drawing his eerie wooden wand. To improve in Defense Against the Dark Arts, there is no better way than combat. With a flick, the desks and chairs were swept aside to the edges of the classroom, clearing a wide space in the center. The students were lifted by an invisible force, standing in the cleared area. "Now, take out your wands," Dracula said with a mischievous smile. "Attack me together, and let me see what 5 years of Hogwarts has taught you." He cast a stunning spell first, which whizzed past Percy's ear and smashed against the classroom window. Crash! The glass shattered into pieces. "Your reaction is too slow," Dracula said coldly. "If this were a life-or-death duel, you would have died 1,000 times over." Percy gritted his teeth, quickly casting a disarming spell at Dracula's eyes. "Expelliarmus!" Dracula waved his head casually, and the red spell flew past him, striking the front blackboard instead. "Good reaction, but your judgment is lacking," Dracula said. Disarming spells are designed to remove weapons. Hitting anywhere on the body works, but the chest is the most effective target. Another red disarming spell silently shot toward him. Dracula flicked his wand, deflecting it to the side. Nice use of the silent spell, Miss Clearwater, he praised. And knowing to sneak attack a strong opponent is clever. Surprise is key. But there is one flaw. You and Percy are facing me head on. Can a frontal attack truly be a sneak attack? Before he finished, a barrage of spells shot from every student in the classroom, leaving almost no space for Dracula to dodge. Yet he did not plan to block aggressively, nor rely on abnormal magic resistance, nor cast a powerful ironclad spell. Faced with countless spells, he walked with casual grace, dodging and deflecting them while pointing out their flaws and suggesting improvements. Move faster. Chain your spells more efficiently. Increase accuracy. Dracula urged, occasionally punishing students who tried to slack off. Every second, the students had to push their magic and physical strength to the limit, continuously casting spell after spell. 10 minutes later, all 6th-year students collapsed to the floor. Dracula had not even cast a single offensive spell. Chapter 105, Chapter 105, You Understand Young Wizards. Chapter 105, You Understand Young Wizards. Some of the 6th-year students at Hogwarts were now filled with regret, deep regret. They hadn't studied properly and had failed the ordinary wizarding level exam in defense against the dark arts. Technically, students who failed this subject wouldn't be allowed to attend the advanced defense against the dark arts class in 6th year. But when Professor McGonagall asked Dracula what level of students he was willing to accept for the advanced class, he directly said that even students with a terrible grade could join an absurdly lenient condition. Those students who performed poorly across most subjects, and who had few options for advanced classes anyway, had been worried. Without enough certificates, their future employment prospects would be grim. After all, there weren't many jobs in the wizarding world, and if they couldn't even pass exams while at school, they might be forced to return home to farm, although most of them had also failed herbology, so even farming might be beyond them. Upon hearing that Professor Dracula would accept students with poor grades, the failing students were overjoyed. Being able to join the advanced class meant they still had a chance to practice defense against the dark arts, giving them a much better shot at passing their make-up exams the following year. So they happily ticked defense against the dark arts on their advanced class registration forms and submitted them to their respective heads of house. However, they regretted it the very moment they attended the first class in 6th year defense against the dark arts. Professor Dracula's class was not a class. It was a trial of sheer endurance. He forced the students to continuously cast spells. Anyone who dared slack off was punished with curses that, while not deadly, inflicted excruciating pain. The ordeal continued until every student was utterly exhausted, unable to move even a finger, before he finally relented. If this wasn't the work of a demon, what was? Today, I won't assign homework. Go home and reflect on how to improve your spell-casting skills. Standing as the only one able to remain upright, Dracula addressed the sea of students collapsed on the floor. After giving his homework, he waved his hand to push the students to either side of the classroom, straightened the displaced desks and chairs neatly in the middle, glanced at the tidy classroom and the collapsed students, nodded in satisfaction, and returned to his office. 20 minutes later, the next group of students coming for defense against the dark arts class witnessed a shocking scene. The sides of the classroom were packed with students from all houses, sweat pouring down their faces, robes soaked, pale and gasping, utterly unable to move. What happened here? Cedric froze at the doorway, staring at the defense against the dark arts classroom in disbelief, hesitant to step inside. Fred and George peeked over his shoulders and gasped at the sight. Whoa! They muttered, utterly astonished. Is this some kind of mass murder scene? Well, I guess this is exactly the kind of thing Professor Dracula would pull off. At that moment, their eyes fell on a red-haired boy pinned against the far corner of the classroom by several boys. "Hey, Fred, look! Who's that?" George excitedly tapped Fred on the back. "Oh, Percy! It's so rare to see Percy this miserable. Long time no see." Fred's face lit up with delight as he waved at Percy. Percy's pride was wounded at seeing his siblings so gleeful at his expense, but he had no strength to free himself from the pile of boys pinning him, so he silently turned to face the wall. "Time for class!" Suddenly, a voice rang from the front of the classroom, breaking the tense thoughts of the students at the door. The fourth-year students lifted their heads and saw Professor Dracula standing on the podium, having come down from his office, watching them with keen interest. "Class has started. Why aren't you coming in?" Dracula asked. "Are you afraid that the older students will interfere with your lesson?" As he spoke, he casually raised his hand and, like tossing dumplings into a pot, hurled the exhausted sixth-year students out the second-floor window into the corridor below. Due to the window size, he could only throw 5 or 6 students at a time, repeating several times until all were outside. When Percy Weasley, trapped in the corner, was finally thrown out, the classroom returned to its spacious, bright state. "All right, now you can come in, right?" Dracula asked the students outside, a faint smile on his lips. The trembling fourth-year students filed into the classroom, sitting down and shivering, eyes fixed on the podium, unsure what kind of hell awaited them next. "You seem very interested in what happened in the last class." Dracula slowly scanned the room, smirking. The young wizards shivered under his gaze, lowering their heads, afraid to speak. At that moment, they wished for a brave soul to stand up and tell Dracula they had no interest in what happened last time. "Please don't make them end up like the sixth years." Then, a courageous voice did rise. "Professor, we have no interest in what happened in the last class." The little wizards, heads down like ostriches, looked up in awe, eager to see who had the courage to confront Professor Dracula. Then they saw 2 heads of flaming red hair. Instantly, the young wizards' hearts skipped a beat, a sense of impending doom washing over them. And the Weasley twins did not disappoint. "That's right, Professor, we're not interested in the class itself, just in how you wore Percy out," Fred said, grinning. "Yeah, Professor, we're definitely going to have fun teasing Percy about this when we get home," George added. The students in the classroom shot angry looks at the twins, silently warning them, but the twins were so absorbed in mocking Percy that they didn't notice. "Very well," Dracula said, still smirking. "In that case, I'll let you experience firsthand what it means to be worn out like Percy Weasley." Once again, the desks and chairs in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom were moved to the sides. The next day, Dracula's reputation spread throughout Hogwarts. It didn't happen the previous night because the students who had endured the class were too exhausted to share their experience. They immediately collapsed into sleep. By the next day, the students had regained some energy and began recounting their ordeal to those who hadn't yet attended, wishing them luck and hoping they survived. The young wizards unanimously agreed that when Dracula first arrived last year, he had restrained himself a bit, just having 1 classroom's worth of students cast spells on him simultaneously. Now, that seemed minor. In the eyes of the students, the insane Professor Dracula, in order to ensure everyone experienced being worn out like a dog, had even lowered the entry requirements to the advanced class, making sure no student was left out. Headmaster's office, Hogwarts Tower, 8th floor. "Professor Dracula, several teachers have approached me with complaints," Dumbledore said from behind his desk, looking at Dracula, who was lying casually on the sofa. "They say that after attending your class, students have no energy left for their lessons." "What does that have to do with me?" Dracula replied nonchalantly. "Defense Against the Dark Arts had one of the highest failure rates last term, which embarrassed me. So in my class, all practical exercises must be intensified, to teach those students who only think about fun a proper lesson." His voice unintentionally grew cold, causing the temperature in the office to drop sharply. The warm early autumn air felt like sudden winter. Phoenix Fox, preening nearby, fluffed his feathers in alarm, turning part of his plumage stark white. Dumbledore waved his wand to restore the office's temperature and smoothed Fox's golden-red feathers. "Professor Dracula, I don't mean to say your methods are bad," Dumbledore said, carefully choosing his words. "I understand your approach. Increasing practical exercises is indeed effective for improving students' grades. As I understand it, intensifying real combat practice not only improves defense against the dark arts skills, but also enhances adaptability, combatability, and the application of other subjects, like transfiguration and charms. Moreover, as we both know, Voldemort has returned. He may recover all his power and strike again at any moment. If Hogwarts students have even slightly higher practical abilities, they'll have a better chance of survival." Dumbledore's expression was solemn as he acknowledged Dracula's methods. "Since the headmaster supports my teaching methods, why did you call me here?" Dracula asked, surprised. "My point is, while these practical exercises are beneficial, there are downsides," Dumbledore explained. "Exhausting students in one subject will inevitably make them neglect other subjects. Consequently, fundamentals like transfiguration and charms may gradually be overlooked or forgotten. Defense against the dark arts depends on these foundational skills. Therefore, I suggest that for the students' overall development, we should avoid interfering with their other classes." Dumbledore looked Dracula in the eyes and analyzed the situation in detail. "As expected of a headmaster, Dumbledore," Dracula said, sitting up on the sofa with a light laugh. "Your points are fair, I can't argue with you." "Not at all, just some humble teaching experience," Dumbledore replied, stroking his long white beard. "All right then, tell me, how can we balance practical exercises with other subjects?" Dracula asked. "Professor Dracula, we can approach this differently," Dumbledore said with a wink. "If practicing during class exhausts students and affects their next lesson, why not hold practice at a time when there are no other classes?" "You mean, extra lessons during their free time?" Dracula raised an eyebrow. "Don't call it extra lessons, it doesn't sound good," Dumbledore said with a smile. "We can call it a dueling club. Wizard dueling has been a tradition for centuries, considered the most honorable type of magical combat. No young wizard can resist the lure of a proper duel. They will all want to participate. Professor Dracula, what do you think of this idea?" Looking at Dumbledore's beaming face, Dracula twitched his lips. "You understand young wizards, Headmaster," he acknowledged. "However, there are still some who haven't experienced being worn out like a dog. They must feel it too. No favoritism, right? Then next Monday, the dueling club will officially start after dinner." Chapter 106, Chapter 106, A Week Where Nothing Goes Right. Chapter 106, A Week Where Nothing Goes Right. Even though the first week of school only had 3 days of classes, Harry still felt like he had endured an extremely grueling week. On the very first day he arrived at Hogwarts, he ran into trouble. The barrier between Platform 9 and Platform 10 was blocked, making it impossible to board the Hogwarts Express. Desperate, he decided to drive to the castle himself, but ended up crashing the car into the Whomping Willow, which violently attacked him for a long time. He even lost Mr. Weasley's car in the process. If it hadn't been for Mr. Weasley later sending a letter to Ron saying they'd done a good job, and if the Weasley family hadn't, in a twist of fortune, received the luxury car from Professor Dracula, known as the Louse Lace, Harry would have felt even more guilty. On the second day of school, Ron received a howler from Mrs. Weasley, and Professor Dracula locked him inside a soundproof dome, leaving him dazed from Mrs. Weasley's enormous shouting. And that wasn't all. Even days later, Hedwig still held a grudge against Harry for the disastrous flying car incident. No matter how many treats Harry fed her, the tension wasn't alleviated. To get back at Ron for the driving mishap, Hedwig even nearly tried to snatch his pet rat, Scabbers, and eat him. Luckily, Scabbers was clever enough to sense Hedwig's malicious intent and hid in Ron's trousers, or else Ron's heirloom rat from Percy might have ended up like the unmentionable creature that fell in front of Snape that day. To protect his beloved Scabbers, Ron ended up having an argument with Harry. All of these incidents were minor compared to the real torment, Professor Dracula's defense against the dark arts classes. Harry and the other young wizards felt utterly drained both magically and physically, and none of them wanted to go through it again. It wasn't just Harry's first week that was difficult, Ron's was even worse. After crashing into the Whomping Willow, Ron's old wand inherited from his family broke. The financially struggling Weasleys didn't have enough galleons to buy Ron a new wand. Or rather, even if they did, Mrs. Weasley surely would have refused to buy one for her son who had caused such a catastrophe. With no other choice, Ron patched his wand together with magical tape, thinking it would suffice for at least a semester. But if simply wrapping a wand with tape worked, why would the wizarding world even need wand makers? Ron's wand clearly wasn't functioning normally, it would spark and crackle intermittently. Especially on Friday morning during Charms class, when Ron tried to cast a spell, the wand suddenly flew out of his hand and hit the diminutive Professor Flitwick squarely on the forehead. Professor Flitwick let out a surprised "Ayo!" and a green bump immediately formed on his forehead, pulsating as if alive. As a result, Flitwick, in a rare move, deducted points from Gryffindor. The nightmare defense against the dark arts classes were even worse. Ron's faulty wand caused him immense trouble, making it impossible to cast even the simplest spell. Given this situation, Professor Dracula often looked after Ron by applying small punitive spells, forcing him to use his broken wand to perform magic. Because of all these unfortunate events, Harry and Ron were relieved when Friday night finally arrived. Exhausted, they collapsed onto their beds and immediately fell asleep, intending to sleep for hours and recover fully from the week's grievances. Early the next morning, Harry was awakened by a tall, burly figure shaking him. He had planned to sleep a few more hours until noon. What is it?" Harry mumbled, squinting at the figure. "Quidditch practice," the burly figure said. "Get up." Rubbing his eyes, Harry half opened them and looked outside, wondering if he had overslept. Outside the Gryffindor dormitory, a thin mist hovered over the sky painted in pink and pale gold, and the crisp chirping of birds floated in through the windows. "Oliver," Harry muttered, glaring at the tall young man beside him, who was the captain of their Quidditch team, Oliver Wood. "Isn't it a bit early? The sun just rose. Are you sure you're not mistaken about the time?" "I'm not mistaken." Oliver's eyes shone with a fanatical light. "This is part of our new training plan for the team. Grab your broomstick and come with me," he urged. "The other teams haven't even started practice yet. We have to push them to the limit and defend our Quidditch Cup." "Oliver, how do you have so much energy?" Harry stared incredulously at Wood's wild enthusiasm. "Even Professor Dracula's sadistic defense against the dark arts class didn't slow you down." "I have to admit, Professor Dracula's class is really grueling," Wood admitted, a faint hint of fear in his eyes, but it was mixed with a strange sense of satisfaction. "But after yesterday's Quidditch practice, I realized my stamina had increased tremendously. My progress is greater than all of last year. I've discovered that only through extreme training can we achieve greater growth. From now on, our Quidditch training should be modeled after Dracula's defense against the dark arts." Seeing the serious expression on Wood's face, Harry realized he wasn't joking. "Oliver, I need to ask you something." Harry swallowed nervously. "Do you have a masochistic streak, Oliver?" Harry decided not to press the matter further and reluctantly joined the early morning Quidditch training. He yawned and, still shaking from fatigue, dragged himself out of bed to find his team uniform. By the time Harry arrived at the pitch, the rest of the Gryffindor team was already in the locker room. He was relieved to see that only Wood was fully awake. Fred and George looked dazed, still suffering from the torment of defense against the dark arts class, their hair messy and eyes puffy. The female players, chasers Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, were across the room, repeatedly yawning. Once all the players were assembled, Wood raised a large Quidditch tactical board covered in colorful lines, arrows, and crosses. He pointed his wand at the board, and the arrows wriggled like little caterpillars. In front of the drowsy Gryffindor players, Wood began explaining his new strategy, but no one could actually pay attention. An hour later, amidst a chorus of snores, Wood finally clapped his hands. "That's the overall strategy. Any questions?" "Zzz, zzz. You mean I painstakingly explained all of that and none of you got a single word?" he scolded. "Well, it's not like we didn't hear anything." Fred rubbed his sleepy eyes and lifted his head from Angelina's shoulder. "I got one sentence, that's the overall strategy. I think I repeated it correctly, right?" Seeing his teammates indifferent, Wood frowned. "Listen up, team," he said sternly. "Last year, we won the Quidditch Cup thanks to a bit of luck and absolute skill. That was great. But this year, the challenge is even tougher. Other teams won't stand still. We have to work 100 times harder if we want to defend our championship. That's all I have to say. Now, let's put the new theory into practice." Wood shouted, grabbing his broomstick and leading the way out of the locker room. The rest of the team, still yawning and dragging their numb legs, followed reluctantly. However, Harry seemed destined not to have a smooth week. Not long after starting practice, the Slytherin Quidditch team, dressed in green robes, arrived. At Hogwarts, there's a centuries-old tradition: whenever lions and snakes meet, a fight is inevitable. Sure enough, the two teams clashed immediately. Wood claimed they had reserved the pitch, but Marcus Flint, the Slytherin captain, produced a note signed by Professor Snape. "I, Professor S. Snape, permit the Slytherin team to practice on the Quidditch pitch today to train their new seeker." The Gryffindor players then noticed that second-year Draco Malfoy had become Slytherin's new seeker. He hadn't earned the position through skill; his wealthy father, Lucius Malfoy, had simply bought him in. Lucius donated 7 brand new Nimbus 2001 broomsticks, effectively using his money to secure Draco's spot on the team. Naturally, the Slytherins mocked the Gryffindor players' old clean sweep 7s, while Hermione sharply criticized Malfoy for buying his place on the team. Malfoy, offended, spat out a particularly vile insult. "None of your business, you stinky mudblood." The derogatory term for Muggleborns ignited the battlefield. Gryffindor players roared and charged. Flint had to block Draco from being attacked by Fred and George. Ron, watching Harry train with Hermione, angrily drew his patched wand and shouted, "You'll pay for this, Malfoy." In a surge of rage, he cast a spell Fred and George had taught him, a powerful one called the Slug Vomiting Charm. And it hit him perfectly. A massive explosion echoed across the stadium. A green light shot from the back of his wand, striking Ron in the stomach and sending him stumbling 2 steps before collapsing. "Ron! Ron! Are you okay?" Hermione crouched beside him, worried. Ron opened his mouth to reply, but instead let out a massive belch, and several thick, wriggling slugs poured from his mouth onto his thighs. The Slytherins burst into laughter at the spectacle. Flint doubled over laughing, holding his Nimbus 2001 steady on the ground. Malfoy laughed so hard he fell to the ground, pounding his fists. The Gryffindor players looked on worriedly, surrounding Ron, but no one dared touch him as he continued spewing glittering, slimy slugs. "Fred, George, you're his brothers, help him to the infirmary," Wood said heavily, patting the twins on the shoulder. "That, team captain, I think we should just leave little Ron here," Fred said disdainfully, stepping back. "If we carry him all the way to the 4th floor infirmary, he'll leave a trail of slugs all the way, and we'd just give Snape an excuse to deduct points. Ron, hang in there. You can do it." George gave a thumbs up, also stepping back. Well done, Ron. At least you learned the nasty curse we taught you. Seeing his unreliable brothers, Harry clenched his teeth and went to Ron's side. We should take him to Hagrid's hut, it's the closest, he said to Hermione. Bravely, Hermione nodded and together with Harry, she helped lift Ron. Fred was right, Ron left a slimy trail, but the Quidditch pitch was far north of Hogwarts, and Hagrid's hut wasn't too far. Just as they arrived at Hagrid's door and reached out to knock, a silver-haired figure suddenly opened it. Harry and Hermione's faces lit up with relief. Professor Dracula, Ron got hit by a slug-vomiting charm. Can you remove it? Hermione asked hopefully. Dracula looked at the three young wizards in surprise, then glanced at Ron with interest. Of course. The counter curse is actually very simple, he said casually, raising his hand to undo the charm. At that moment, Ron couldn't hold it in and vomited another shiny slug, which landed right on Dracula's shoe. The air fell silent. Dracula paused mid-motion. I seem to have forgotten the counter curse for the slug vomiting charm, he said coldly. Chapter 107, Chapter 107, The Overloaded Wand. Chapter 107, The Overloaded Wand. Dracula's cold, emotionless words drained all hope from Ron, leaving him utterly despondent. Professor, no, ugh. He gagged painfully, clutching his stomach. Don't be so heartless, Professor, ugh. Just as Ron was about to expel another slug-like spell from his mouth, Dracula frowned in distaste and quickly muttered an incantation. Mimble-wimble. This was the silencing charm Dracula had once used on Lockhart, highly effective under certain circumstances. Under the effect of the charm, Ron's mouth snapped shut. The slug-like magical creature he was about to spit out became stuck in his mouth, caught between not being able to spit it out and not daring to swallow it. Ron gestured frantically, eyes red, staring at Dracula, on the verge of tears. Dracula flicked the slug off his shoe, then cast a dozen cleaning spells in rapid succession, finally restoring his shoe to a spotless condition. Seeing Ron's embarrassed expression, he finally allowed a faint, satisfied smile to curl his lips. Professor, please, help Ron. Harry pleaded urgently. He and Hermione circled Ron like frantic fire snakes escaping flames, helplessly watching him writhe in discomfort. Professor! Hermione shouted. Look at Ron's face. It's already red as a tomato. If you don't lift the spell soon, he might actually choke on that slug. Dracula glanced at Ron and noted the flushed face. He knew that if the next fat, wiggling slug appeared while Ron's mouth was still closed, it could block his throat entirely, potentially suffocating him. Ah, what a pity, Dracula said with slight regret, not yet finished savoring Ron's expression. He lightly snapped his fingers, and a universal dispelling charm quietly enveloped Ron, instantly removing both the slug spell and the silencing charm from his body. Cough, cough. The moment the spell was lifted, Ron gasped and hacked violently. Ugh, so disgusting. I could literally feel two slugs wriggling in my mouth and throat, he exclaimed. Why couldn't I spit them out just now? Did I digest them? Ron's wide-eyed shock shifted toward Harry and Hermione. What are you talking about? The slugs were magical constructs. Once the magic is gone, they vanish naturally, Dracula explained casually. Hearing Dracula's calm explanation, Ron turned his startled gaze toward him. Professor! How could you make me shut my mouth at such a crucial moment? That's totally unfair, he waved his hands, his face red with indignation. Oh? Unfair, am I? Dracula's lips curved into a faintly sinister smile. Ron shivered instinctively. Ah! Professor, you misunderstood. That's not what I meant. His anger cooled immediately, and he forced a flattering smile. I meant, your method is actually very considerate. I realize you're trying to strengthen my resolve. I understand. From now on, when I face a dark wizard or creature, every time I recall today's experience, I will never fall into despair and will summon greater courage to face danger. As he spoke, Ron straightened his back, lifting his chin, exuding newfound confidence. Whether or not Dracula was convinced, Ron at least convinced himself. If you want, next time I could make you swallow even more slugs, Dracula said, intrigued, watching Ron's proud stance. If that's not enough, I could modify the spell. The slug spell is too tame. How about cockroaches? Or, if you like, spiders. Hearing spiders, Ron, who had been trying to act brave, trembled violently, his face going pale. Professor Dracula, please don't scare Ron further. He's terrified of spiders, Hermione said, pursing her lips seriously at Dracula's lack of conscience. Yet Ron hardly seemed reassured. Who's afraid of spiders? He stammered, trying to save face. I'm a grown man. How could I possibly fear spiders? Then tell me, Hermione shot back, smirking. Who jumped 3 feet high last Halloween when a huge spider was at the entrance to the Great Hall? Everyone saw you cling to Harry's neck until he carried you inside. You. Ron pointed at Hermione, stammering, unable to form any coherent defense. Ron, you might as well admit it, you really are afraid of spiders, Harry said, glancing at the indignant Hermione and the sulking Ron, mediating the dispute. Seeing the three of them finally pause, Dracula pondered a question. Now that your little debate is over, perhaps you could explain the situation to me, he said. This slug spell seems quite effective. Who used such a cruel spell on Weasley? Some Slytherin nemesis. No, Professor, I did it to myself, Harry said, trying to suppress a chuckle. Ron stiffened and lowered his head, slumping further. To yourself? Dracula looked at him in surprise. You can be that cruel to yourself? I wouldn't have guessed it, Weasley. Quite ruthless of you. No, actually it was my wand, Hermione interjected happily. Seeing Ron get cornered again, she was quite pleased. Ron originally intended to use the slug spell on that annoying Draco Malfoy, but the spell shot out the wrong end of his wand. Really? Dracula's interest piqued as he looked at Ron's slumped shoulders. Weasley, may I see your wand? Dracula had noticed some problems with Ron's wand during previous defense against the dark arts classes but had never cared much. Now he was fascinated that Ron's wand could cast spells backward, striking him instead. Dracula immediately realized the wand had great potential for misdirection. For example, when facing a dark wizard, a small wizard could first hand over a wand that only casts backward, tricking the enemy into using it. Then, the opponent would unknowingly hit themselves with their own spell. A sly grin spread across Dracula's face. Ron shivered at the sight. Of course, Professor, I've had enough of this wand, he quickly said, pulling it from his pocket. It originally belonged to Charlie. Later, Charlie bought a new wand, and Mom gave me the old one. She probably didn't realize I'd break it after only a year of use. Harry patted Ron's shoulder sympathetically. Dracula ignored Ron's backstory. What mattered was the wand's ability to reverse spells. As soon as he took the wand, he felt it tremble lightly in his hand. The sensation was identical to the first time he tried a unicorn hair wand at Ollivander's, though the struggle was weaker, perhaps because this wand was damaged. Unicorn tail hair core? Dracula asked casually. Yes. Charlie said so. White waxwood, 12 inches, Ron explained carefully. Professor, you know about wands too? Could you fix it for me? A flicker of hope ignited in his heart. If Dracula repaired it, he wouldn't have to confess the broken wand to Mrs. Weasley, possibly avoiding a punishment. I don't know much. Wands don't interest me. Dracula's cold words extinguished Ron's hope immediately. Ron slumped again. Dracula studied the trembling wand, suppressing his dark energy deep within and channeling only pure magic to his right hand. A soft glow emanated from his hand, his pale skin taking on a jade-like warmth. Ron's wand gradually stopped trembling, resting calmly in his hand. Dracula smiled faintly in satisfaction and lifted his hand. Lumos. A beam of white light appeared at the wand tip. Sparks occasionally flared along the shaft, a reminder that the wand was broken. Perhaps the magical load isn't enough. Dracula mused, frowning slightly, then cast an enhanced version of the illumination charm. Lumos Solemn. The wand erupted with unprecedented sparks, and a dazzling light shot from its base, illuminating the area around Hagrid's hut so brightly it nearly blinded the three young wizards. "Ah, who am I? Where am I?" Ron's voice called out from the blinding brightness. "This is terrible, I can't see." Harry panicked. "Professor, what did you do?" "Harry, Ron, stay calm," Hermione shouted. "Be thankful he only experimented with a lighting spell, not an offensive one. Something happened outside." Hagrid's rough voice came from the hut. "Harry, was that you? I thought I heard your voice." Amidst the light, Dracula's crimson eyes glowed, watching the wand with keen interest. He sensed that when his pure magic passed through Ron's wand to the middle shaft, it met significant resistance. With a simple illumination charm, some magic leaked out as sparks along the wand, while the remainder passed through, casting the spell. But with the highest level illumination charm, excess magic accumulated at the obstruction, eventually causing an explosion similar to a Muggle gun's barrel bursting. The difference: a gun is destroyed in the process, but Ron's wand could release the excess magic repeatedly. This explained why Ron could cast such a powerful slug spell. Understanding the wand's mechanism, Dracula grinned. Amid the panicked voices of the trio and Hagrid, he snapped his fingers lightly. Knocks. The wand's light vanished instantly, and Hagrid's front yard returned to normal. "Thanks for the wand, Ron. It gave me some inspiration," Dracula said, returning the wand with a light laugh. "By the way, you two had doubled homework a couple weeks ago, right? Consider it cancelled." Dracula's mood was excellent. He nodded to Hagrid, then lifted a cage covered with black cloth at the hut's door and departed. Harry and Ron exchanged incredulous looks, their faces lighting up with shock and joy. The next moment, they jumped in unison. "Yay!" Hermione, slightly annoyed, turned to Hagrid. "Hagrid, what was in the cage that Professor Dracula took from the door?" she asked curiously. "Oh, that," Hagrid yawned, rubbing his eyes dazzled by the earlier light. "Dracula woke me up early this morning. We went into the Forbidden Forest to catch some interesting creatures. I don't know what he did in the cage, but there were at least a dozen magical creatures inside, Hinky Punks, Grindylows, and the like. I guess he wants to bring them to class." "Oh, right. He also mentioned he wouldn't assign homework for the first half of the month," Hagrid added. Harry and Ron's joyful cheers abruptly fell silent. Chapter 108, Chapter 108, The Death Eater Meeting at Malfoy Manor. Chapter 108, The Death Eater Meeting at Malfoy Manor. While Harry and Ron were still grumbling over the first week of school going badly, on the other side, Harry's archenemy Voldemort was quietly scheming something big. Inside an exquisitely decorated and stately mansion, a meticulously designed garden surrounded the house. A pale, tranquil green suffused the entire courtyard, and on either side of the stone paths, more than 100 elegant trees were planted densely. A magical fountain gushed at the center of the garden, and white peacocks wandered freely, exuding an aura of luxury and nobility. Yet the master of this mansion bowed and scraped in the purple-walled drawing room, repeatedly nodding and kowtowing to a bald, twisted, and hideous-looking man sitting at the head of the room. "Lucius, how are the tasks I assigned to you progressing?" the hideous man asked hoarsely from his seat at the front of the drawing room. "Everything has been taken care of, Master," Lucius said, bowing so deeply that his head nearly touched the floor, speaking with utmost respect. I have used a large amount of wealth and leveraged the Malfoy family's connections to pave the way for Axley's promotion. According to reliable sources, it won't be long before he becomes the third in command of the Magical Law Enforcement Office. Lucius kept his head lowered so far that no one could see the resentment and frustration etched across his face. Back during the First Wizarding War stirred up by the Death Eaters, Lucius, relying on the Malfoy family's substantial wealth and his skill at flattery and manipulation, had easily risen to become one of the top figures among the Death Eaters. But because he had lost an unknown dark magical artifact belonging to Voldemort, Lucius had been coldly sidelined. Now, he no longer carried any of the former prestige within the Death Eater ranks. He could feel that his position in Voldemort's eyes was equivalent to a disposable pawn, to be discarded like garbage once his final usefulness was extracted and the Malfoy family's wealth drained. Thus, a sense of unwillingness and even thoughts of betrayal lingered in Lucius's heart. Recalling the dark artifact sales list he had sent to Dracula a few days ago, Lucius felt a flicker of panic but quickly suppressed it under his simmering anger and resentment. "You've done well, Lucius," Voldemort's hoarse voice echoed from the front of the room. Though his words sounded encouraging, his eyes were blood-red and piercing, cold like a predator snake. "These past few days, you have contributed your estate and countless resources to pave the way for Axley in the Ministry, truly dedicating yourself. I have always been fair in rewards and punishments. Tell me, what reward do you wish for?" "To serve my master is all the reward I desire," Lucius replied, flattering in words. But beneath his bowed head, his expression revealed nothing but reluctance, with no trace of servility. "You think I don't know you, Lucius?" Voldemort's spider-like hands intertwined as he stared into Lucius's lowered eyes. "If I don't give you your reward, you would probably start plotting your betrayal immediately, wouldn't you?" Hearing Voldemort's sinister words, Lucius panicked, fearing that his meeting with Dracula had been discovered. "Master," Lucius nearly spilled the details in his flustered state. Fortunately, Voldemort interrupted him before he could speak. "Let me think, what reward would be interesting to give you?" Voldemort suddenly said, a terrifyingly grotesque smile splitting his face. "Lucius, you have a son, don't you? I see he's not at the manor. He must have started at Hogwarts already." Lucius's face turned pale. He had deliberately waited until Hogwarts reopened to hand over Malfoy Manor to Voldemort, specifically to keep his son Draco out of the Death Eater mess. Yet, try as he might, Lucius never imagined Voldemort would suddenly bring up Draco. The Dark Lord intended to use his son as leverage to ensure Lucius's loyalty. "You don't wish to comply?" Voldemort said, watching Lucius's panic, lightly tapping his pale side of the face with his wand. Lucius's mind went blank. He wanted to refuse this so-called reward, yet several attempts to speak faltered, and no words of refusal came out. At that moment, from the other side of the long table under the grand chandelier, a calm voice intervened, subtly relieving Lucius. "Master, Draco is my student. He is too young and too headstrong, and might impede your grand plans," Snape said slowly. "If you require Draco to join the Death Eaters, I can pay closer attention to him over the next 2 school years and ensure he develops into the talent you desire." Severus Snape sat properly in the first seat to Voldemort's right, a clear sign of his high standing in the Dark Lord's eyes. "Very well," Voldemort said, slightly turning to look at Snape and nodding. "Since Severus has spoken, that reward can wait another 2 years." He gestured for Lucius to return to his original seat. Lucius breathed a sigh of relief, giving Snape a grateful look, then bowed deeply again and took his seat to Voldemort's left. To Voldemort's left, the first seat was occupied by a tall, proud wizard dressed in luxurious robes, his pale blonde hair braided neatly. Seeing Lucius sit down, the haughty wizard smiled lightly. "Thank you for your efforts, Lucius. You must have spent quite a bit of money and leveraged connections to secure my promotion, haven't you?" "You're welcome, Axley," Lucius replied, still shaken from his earlier panic, glancing at the man with a blank expression. Axley, a high-ranking wizard in the Ministry, had recently learned from Amelia Bones, head of the Magical Law Enforcement Office, and Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror Office, that Malfoy Manor was going to be inspected and had informed Lucius. Ironically, the anonymous letter reporting Malfoy Manor was from Voldemort himself. Lucius, though spared from the Ministry's inspection due to Axley's tip, lost Voldemort's trust in the process, allowing Axley to take the position he once held. Soon after, when Voldemort returned using the Dark Mark, Axley reunited with his former master. Realizing Axley held influence in the Ministry, Voldemort saw a chance to infiltrate and control the Ministry, gaining more sway in the wizarding world and countering Dumbledore and Dracula. Thus, Voldemort commanded Lucius to use the Malfoy family's resources to pave the way for Axley in the Ministry. In fact, I wonder, with the combined influence of the Axley and Malfoy families, pooling the resources of 2 of the 28 sacred houses, how can it only be enough for me to reach the third in command of the Magical Law Enforcement Office? Axley said, eyebrows raised and forehead furrowed. Amelia Bones and Rufus Scrimgeour's positions are not easy to shake. Lucius argued. You know this clearly. This current director and Auror head are known for their iron fists, not to mention the strength of their families. Strength? Axley snorted disdainfully. Are you talking about the so-called power of the Bones family, all Hufflepuffs, or the Scrimgeour family, with barely a few members? Even ignoring influence, their careers have no blemishes. How are we supposed to topple them? Lucius retorted. Axley's face darkened, slamming his hand on the armrest. You two, be quiet. Voldemort's cold voice cut through their shouting. Lucius is right, it's not easy to remove them. And Axley is also correct, a mere third in command won't help our grand cause. Master, we could wait until Bones and Scrimgeour's terms end. Lucius adjusted his slightly disheveled robes and spoke solemnly. Too late. We must push Axley higher in a short time. Voldemort interrupted. Since they have no political blemishes, why not create one for them? What would happen if Azkaban were breached while the current heads were in office? Voldemort's lips thinned into a cold line, and his red eyes scanned the gathered Death Eaters, freezing them in fear. Only Snape remained mostly unaffected. He asked calmly, Master, do we intend to rescue our comrades imprisoned in Azkaban? Yes. Unlike the cowardly ones here, only concerned with their own escape, who don't even make a token effort. Voldemort sneered. Those imprisoned in Azkaban are my most loyal and trustworthy comrades. By attacking Azkaban, we can rescue the most reliable allies and simultaneously taint the careers of Bones and Scrimgeour, promoting Axley. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The Death Eaters applauded enthusiastically, praising Voldemort's strategy. Amid the flattery, Voldemort smiled faintly, then suddenly looked at Snape. Severus, are you afraid? The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Snape. I do not understand, Master, Snape replied, feigning slight confusion. No, you understand perfectly, Voldemort said lightly. After I rescue the most loyal, will you fear your position being shaken? Snape's pupils constricted. He understood this was yet another subtle test. Voldemort had not given him full trust. He remained vigilant, though outwardly calm. Lucius, also an undercover, did not need such constant mental effort. He was naturally a fence-sitter, with some alignment to Voldemort's ideals. Even though Lucius's occlumency was not as refined as Snape's, hiding only the details of his meeting with Dracula and the artifact list, Voldemort detected nothing unusual. Voldemort already anticipated, or rather, understood the fence-sitting nature of the Malfoy family. Lucius's occasional thoughts of escape were unsurprising to him. Just as Voldemort began explaining the timing and plan to assault Azkaban, a handsome black-haired young man appeared silently in the drawing room, like a shadow. "You're planning to invade Azkaban already?" he asked softly, holding a diary. Chapter 109, Chapter 109, Riddle and Voldemort's Confrontation. Chapter 109, Riddle and Voldemort's Confrontation. Seeing the extremely handsome black-haired youth before him, Severus Snape's pupils suddenly contracted. He clearly remembered having seen that face just last school year, in the restricted area where the Philosopher's Stone was kept. It was with this face that Voldemort first met him. Snape frowned and cast an inquiring glance at Voldemort. "Don't be nervous, Severus," Voldemort said softly when he saw Snape's expression, turning his gaze to the gathered Death Eaters. "Let me introduce you all. This is a projection I've created. You can trust him completely." Hearing Voldemort refer to him as a projection, Tom Riddle, born from the Horcrux diary, displayed a barely perceptible frown of displeasure, but he did not argue. "I'm asking you something. Why would you dare act against Azkaban when the Death Eater forces haven't even fully regained their strength?" Riddle's cold voice mirrored Voldemort's own. "Don't you realize the consequences of exposing our restored forces to the entire wizarding world? How dare you speak to your creator that way?" Voldemort's expression darkened as well. Though inwardly irritated, Riddle remained cautious. Voldemort did not believe his Death Eaters could know of such advanced, secretive dark magic as Horcruxes. But just in case any oversmart follower guessed that Riddle's consciousness originated from a Horcrux, he avoided calling himself the original soul and instead used the ambiguous term creator. "You only possess a very small fraction of my memories," Voldemort said, staring intently into Riddle's eyes. "I have to say, you're still too inexperienced. Do you think I don't understand the consequences of your actions? Do you think I don't know this will expose my return to the wizarding world?" As he spoke, he glanced at the Death Eaters seated around the long table. "You all heard me. Attacking Azkaban is something I've carefully considered. It is absolutely more beneficial than harmful." "That's right. Attacking Azkaban will reveal our existence, which is exactly why I've arranged personnel in the Ministry. Once our companions are rescued, Axley will coordinate with the Ministry leadership to spin the attack as a Dementor uprising accident. Everyone here is aware of the kind of man Cornelius Fudge, the current Minister for Magic, is, right?" Voldemort sneered. "Fudge is a fool, arrogant, short-sighted, and utterly useless." Axley, sitting first on the left, leaned back in his chair, laughing scornfully. "I can agree with Axley. Fudge is a complete failure." Lucius tapped his wand against the floor, smirking in disdain. Most of the other Death Eaters added their own scornful opinions. Round after round, there were almost no positive comments about Fudge. Everyone here seemed to consider him a fool, a waste. "Seems everyone understands Fudge's foolishness," Voldemort said, raising his left hand to silence them. "He is cowardly, obsessed with stability and peace, unwilling to risk the security of his position. So I can say with confidence, as long as we operate strategically within the Ministry, Fudge will unknowingly shield the wizarding world from noticing my return." Riddle, from within the diary, looked at Voldemort's twisted, grotesque face, pondering. But Azkaban being breached is such a big event. How could Cornelius Fudge keep it hidden? He suddenly asked. Any wizard with some connections in the magical world, unless utterly insignificant, could easily discover the truth, or at least part of it. We would still be exposed to their attention. "Wake up, young one," Voldemort said, glaring at Riddle with his crimson eyes, voice low and menacing. "We've actually already been exposed. Whether it's Dumbledore or Dracula, they know we've returned. They are the only ones we need to concern ourselves with. As for the rest of the fools, let them think whatever they want. As long as the majority remain in the dark and this operation doesn't trigger a massive reaction, our plans will remain unbroken. Dumbledore, Dracula, no rush. I have all the time in the world to toy with them." Thinking of the threats posed by Dumbledore and Dracula, Voldemort's spider-like, deformed fingers gripped the armrest of his chair, his expression icy and dark. With a loud crack, the armrest splintered beneath his grip. Riddle glanced at the shattered armrest, but his expression remained unchanged. "You make sense," he continued, asking, "but have you considered how, with the few people here, you plan to break Azkaban's containment under the influence of countless Dementors and rescue our allies?" Hearing this, Voldemort laughed lightly. "Worried about Dementors, are you? You still know too little," he said nonchalantly. "Dementors are creatures of darkness that can be turned to my use. There's no reason to worry about them. Do you know why? Because we can offer them what the Ministry cannot. Given a choice between the Ministry and us, they will naturally choose our side." The Horcrux diary only recorded Voldemort's memories up to age 16. Riddle had no knowledge of what Voldemort had done after graduation. He did not know that Voldemort personally studied the areas around Azkaban, researching Dementors in-depth, creatures strange even by wizarding standards, and even adapted his own body through their non-existence forms, learning to transform into black mist for flight. Normal wizards, upon seeing Dementors feeding on happiness, often felt unease, depression, or despair. Voldemort, however, thrived among them. Because Dementors detect emotions to feed, and Voldemort, a product of enchantment, had no positive emotions, they could do nothing to him. During his research, Voldemort realized the Ministry's control over Dementors was shallow and fragile. If one day he established his regime and allowed Dementors free rein to feed across the world, they would abandon the Ministry and serve him instead. Though his power was not yet fully restored, negotiating with Dementors was no problem. Even if the Ministry suspected the Dementors' dereliction, they would incur no real loss. Dementors, such reliable and free labor, were too valuable to ignore. The Ministry would be forced to continue using them to guard prisoners without extra costs. If a strong minister were in power, perhaps some worry would be warranted, Voldemort thought with a cold laugh. But now that that useless fudge is minister, a cowardly retreater, he won't dare intervene against Dementors. Thinking this, Voldemort discarded any concern about attacking Azkaban, waving casually to the Death Eaters around the long table. "You may leave and complete the tasks I assigned at this meeting," he said. "Those who fail to complete their tasks know the consequences." In the Malfoy Manor living room, the Death Eaters rose respectfully, bowed to the Dark Lord, and operated out of the room. Even those like Lucius, already residing at Malfoy Manor, stepped cautiously out, leaving the space to the Dark Lord and his rebellious projection. Soon, only Voldemort and Riddle remained in the spacious living room. "You've come just in time. If I had obtained that thing, the assault on Azkaban would be fully secured," Voldemort said, suppressing the burning intensity in his gaze as he looked at Riddle. "Did you bring it?" Riddle's handsome face paled slightly as he shook his head. "What did you say?" Voldemort's burning gaze turned icy, his crimson eyes gleamed with bloodlust. "Half a year. Since I left you at Hogwarts, 6 months have passed, and you haven't even collected the blood of a first-year wizard." He rose, stepped forward, and pressed his wand against Riddle's forehead. "You know my Horcrux, right? With Potter's blood, I could regain the full power of my body, which benefits both you and me immensely. But why have you refused to do this? Do you think my Horcrux can't manage?" "I've done my best," Riddle said calmly, detailing his efforts. "While at Hogwarts, under Dumbledore and Dracula's watch, I couldn't openly collect Harry Potter's blood. So I wrote Harry's name on the diary's pages, hid close to him, gained his trust through conversations and tutoring, and waited until I found him alone and unguarded. But I did not expect that Harry's blood contains a powerful protective magic that counteracts us. I could not collect it through normal means and had to seek other methods." Voldemort released the wand from Riddle's forehead, frowning. "Of course," he said coldly, "when I possessed Quirinus Quirrell, he couldn't physically touch Potter. That's due to this protective magic. Lily Potter left a spell in Harry's blood specifically against me. So that's why you prefer to wait rather than regain power immediately?" Riddle asked. "Exactly," Voldemort said with a sly grin. I can't wait to see his expression when he realizes the protective magic his mother sacrificed her life for flows in his enemy. I understand, Riddle said softly, lowering his head. I'll secure it as soon as possible. Even if you cannot directly take his blood, why not use the Imperious Curse to bring him before me? Voldemort pressed. During those 2 summer months, you had many opportunities, right? I tried, Riddle said. But Harry has a talisman made by Dracula that absorbs almost all dark magic. As a diary with limited power, I cannot bypass it. Ironically, the talisman would have most likely been in Hermione's hands. Without it, Harry could have easily been controlled, and Voldemort would have regained his blood fully. But to gain Harry's trust, Riddle patiently tutored him in defense against the dark arts, and Harry's natural talent in the subject led him to surpass Hermione, earning Dracula's talisman himself. Because of this talisman, Riddle could not use the Imperious Curse. You are useless. Voldemort slammed his hand on the long table, cracking the polished surface. I'll give you another month and a half by the chime of Halloween, I must see Harry's blood before me. Having said this, Voldemort turned and left the Malfoy Manor living room without looking back, fearing he might destroy the useless Horcrux in anger. Riddle exhaled slowly, relaxing. Attending the Death Eater meeting had been extremely risky. Riddle had absorbed the Horcrux crown from the Room of Requirement, making his soul several times stronger than when Voldemort first found him at Malfoy Manor. Yet, if he had refused to attend out of fear, Voldemort would immediately grow suspicious. Though he would not believe a Horcrux could betray him, he might question his control over a self-aware Horcrux. Fortunately, Voldemort seemed oblivious. Whether from overconfidence or Riddle's careful concealment, Voldemort assumed the diary's awakened consciousness was just the normal level of a self-aware Horcrux. Riddle remained alive, the combined soul essence from 2 Horcruxes intact. Do I need to collect the blood before Halloween? Riddle pondered aloud, setting aside concerns for his life. Does this mean he plans to attack Azkaban on Halloween? Riddle knew that from sunset to sunrise on Halloween, the night would be the peak of dark magic across the wizarding world. During this time, Voldemort's resurrection ritual would be more effective, and Dementors would be most active. If Voldemort truly negotiated with Dementors, a rescue mission would coincide with the Ministry's most difficult hours. But it's not only dark wizards and Dementors who thrive in such dark magic. Riddle's eyes showed concern as he murmured, thinking of Dracula, surrounded by darkness. After a moment of reflection, he decided not to warn Voldemort. With that, Riddle and the diary in his hands vanished from the room. Chapter 110, Chapter 110, Chocolate Frog Cards. Chapter 110, Chocolate Frog Cards. Inside Hogwarts Castle, Harry was completely unaware that his unlikely mentor and friend, the accidentally acquired diary, had already been ordered to obtain his blood within a month and a half. At this moment, he was worrying about the upcoming defense against the dark arts class tomorrow. Hermione, you're the smartest among us. Could you maybe make a guess about what tomorrow's defense against the dark arts class will be like? Harry sat on the sofa in the Gryffindor common room, his brow furrowed, looking at the young witch scribbling furiously beside him. If you're asking about defense against the dark arts, then I'm definitely not the smartest one here, Harry, the little witch said without even looking up, her hair in disarray. You're the top in defense against the dark arts. It was obvious that Hermione was still a little annoyed that she hadn't achieved first place in every subject, especially when that title went to someone who constantly goofed off with Ron and rarely did his homework, Harry. Oh, come on, Hermione. My last exam results were just a fluke. You're the smart one. Harry flopped onto the table, trying to charm the little witch. At this point, he remembered the diary that had been teaching him. Come to think of it, I haven't seen Tom in the past couple of days. Harry paused, wondering if he had accidentally misplaced the diary somewhere. He was about to go look for Tom the diary to see if it had any insights about defense against the dark arts. At that moment, Ron came down the stairs from the other side of the common room. "Hermione, I brought the book you wanted," he said eagerly, handing the book to the young witch scribbling away. "Take a look, these are the magical creatures Hagrid accidentally mentioned yesterday." Harry stopped mid-step, looking at the book in Ron's hands. The book had a deep green cover with gold patterns, and near the top, 7 golden letters spelled out fantastic beasts and where to find them. "This is the work of Mr. Newt Scamander. If we choose the care of magical creatures elective in 3rd year, this book will likely come in handy," Hermione explained as she took the book. She then looked at them with admiration. "This book contains nearly every magical creature you can encounter in the wizarding world. I have no idea how Scamander managed it." "Wait, Hermione," Ron said, slightly confused, "you're telling me, this is a 3rd year textbook, but you've already read it before?" "Exactly. We're only in 2nd year," Harry added. "What are you two thinking?" Hermione shot them a sharp look. "I finished reading this book before the 1st year even started. I just forgot some parts, so I needed Ron to borrow a copy from the library." "Harry. Ron. All right, stop standing there and come look at this magical creature." Hermione's eyes lit up as she flipped to a page in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. "It's the one Hagrid mentioned yesterday, the Hinky Punk." Harry and Ron leaned in. The book depicted a small, single-legged magical creature holding a lantern and hopping along. The Hinky Punk is a diminutive, single-legged magical creature, appearing in blue, grey, or white smoke-like hues. It likes to pretend to be helpful, carrying a lantern at night to guide travelers, ultimately luring them off the path into dangerous swamps or wetlands. Hermione read aloud from the book's notes, describing the Hinky Punk's behavior. "Wait, the Hinky Punk only lures people into danger?" Ron asked skeptically. "It doesn't seem to have much offensive power, right?" "Seems so," Hermione nodded, her messy hair bouncing. "As long as you pay attention outdoors, you're unlikely to be led into danger by a Hinky Punk." "But, this isn't quite what we imagined," Harry said, puzzled. "We were just guessing how Professor Dracula would torment us. Neville even speculated that he might bring a fire dragon into the classroom for us to fight." "Harry, Professor Dracula is a good teacher. He wouldn't make us face an enemy we can't possibly handle," Hermione said, fuming. Ron hesitated, trying to argue, "Hermione, is it possible? Professor Dracula himself is someone we couldn't possibly defeat." Hermione froze, speechless for a moment. "Ahem, Hermione, let's quickly look at the other magical creature Hagrid mentioned," Harry said, holding back a laugh. "What was it called?" "Grindylow, right?" "It's Grindylow, Harry," Hermione corrected, her confidence returning as the topic returned to magical creatures. "I think Grindelwald is the one on chocolate frog cards, isn't it? Or maybe it was on Dumbledore's card." Ron thought for a moment and pulled a pentagonal blue box from his pocket, opening it. "I happen to have a box of chocolate frogs. We can look for Dumbledore's card," he said, suddenly interested. "I used to collect the whole set of chocolate frog cards, though they're in the dormitory now. Too lazy to get them." "Hermione, how can you be sure Dumbledore's card is in this box?" she asked, eyeing Ron as he opened the pentagonal box. "Can't be certain, but chances are high," Ron said, removing the outer wrapping and lifting the blue pentagonal lid. "Dumbledore has the most cards. When Harry and I first met on the Hogwarts Express, we even pulled a Dumbledore card." He carefully placed the chocolate frog on the table, and Harry quickly held it down to prevent it from jumping. Ron then pulled the pentagonal blue card out from beneath the frog. The card had a golden frame. Inside, an elderly man with glasses, a full head of white hair, and a long white beard smiled kindly. "See? I told you, it's Dumbledore," Ron said proudly, holding up the card for Harry and Hermione. Hermione snatched the card and flipped it over, reading the blue background text carefully. Albus Dumbledore, current headmaster of Hogwarts, widely recognized as the greatest wizard of his time. Dumbledore's known achievements include defeating dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses for dragon's blood, and successful collaboration in alchemy with Nicoleem. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and 10-pin wizarding bowling. The three young wizards didn't understand the full stories behind Dumbledore's widely known achievements but were curious, slightly dazed. "I just realized, we didn't even need to ask Professor Dracula who Nicoleem was," Harry said, stunned. "His name is literally written on Dumbledore's chocolate frog card." "But Professor Dracula gave you the chance to speak with Leem remotely," Hermione said, frustrated that she missed out on talking to the famous alchemist. "You two wasted a golden opportunity. If it were me, I'd have prepared hundreds of questions about alchemy." "So Grindelwald was famous?" Ron asked, confused. "Why is he even listed among Dumbledore's widely known achievements?" "I just remembered." Hermione's eyes lit up. She pulled out a thick history of magic book. "You guys clearly weren't paying attention in history of magic." "Besides Hermione, who even listens to history of magic?" Ron muttered quietly. Ignoring him, Hermione flipped to a later page, showing a middle-aged blonde-haired, blue-eyed wizard laughing wildly at the three young wizards outside the book. If Professor Dracula saw the image, he might connect it to the golden-haired youth he once glimpsed in the erased mirror, perhaps sparking a deeper interest in this famous dark wizard of the first half of the century. However, Harry and Ron weren't particularly interested in this dark wizard defeated by Dumbledore. They just wanted to interrupt Hermione's insatiable curiosity and steer the discussion away from boring history of magic. "Hermione, have you forgotten our main task?" Harry said cautiously. "We need to check what tomorrow's Defense Against the Dark Arts class will cover." For other subjects, they could have already found the next lesson in textbooks. But Professor Dracula's Defense Against the Dark Arts lessons were always unpredictable, jumping from topic to topic with no planning. No wonder the failure rate for this subject was higher than most core courses. Of course, Dracula was reliable enough, but past years' failure rates in Defense Against the Dark Arts were much higher than the previous year. The problem for the young wizards was that this year, Dracula had made his own textbook, but it wasn't for teaching. It only criticized the flaws of dark magic, a self-defense guide, so no book really helped. The next class's content could only be left to fate. This frustrated Hermione, who wanted to prepare in advance. Hearing Harry's concern, Hermione finally put aside the history of magic book and glanced at him. It was just that Harry had mispronounced Grindelwald as Grindelwald from the chocolate frog cards, which derailed the topic. "The last creature is Grindelwald. Don't mispronounce it next time, Harry," Hermione said, flipping through Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them a few pages. "Found it. Grindelwald is a green water demon with horns, a type of dark magic creature. Its body is green with green teeth and horns on its head. Its fingers are very long, strong for grasping things, but they break easily." Danger rating XX? Seems a bit low, Ron said, curious about the book's danger rating. "Hermione, the Niazzle you always wanted to raise, what rating is it?" "X level. The Niazzle is triple X level, with certain dangerous traits," Hermione explained. "So I want to raise a hybrid kitten with some Niazzle blood, not a purebred Niazzle." "What?" Ron's eyes widened. "A cat is triple X level magical." "Hermione, please just don't raise a cat. Think of Scabbers, okay?" Ron pleaded. "Trained hybrid Niazzles aren't dangerous," Hermione corrected sternly. "And I'll feed mine properly so it won't eat mice. You can't deny me raising a cat just because you have a rat." "Hey! You're saying Scabbers is dirty?" Ron angrily retorted. Seeing their argument escalating, Harry quickly stepped in as peacemaker. "Ron, Hermione, you're off topic again," Harry said. We still haven't figured out Grindelows' danger level. No need to study it. Grindelow isn't too dangerous, Hermione said, sitting down, turning her head away. I think Professor Dracula won't make us face that kind of brutal combat again. That's a relief, Harry said, letting out a sigh. Even though Hermione speculated that Dracula wouldn't be as harsh as the first week, the three still couldn't be sure what they would face in tomorrow's defense against the dark arts class. So the next day, after finishing the first herbology class, Harry volunteered to check with a third-year student whose first class was defense against the dark arts. Harry, why are you so diligent today? Ron asked, watching Harry quickly pack up from herbology. Third-year material is different from second year. I don't think it'll help much. Third and second year differ by just 1 year. Defense against the dark arts shouldn't change much, Harry said, slinging his bag over his shoulder and preparing to dash to the first greenhouse's door. Besides, I happen to know someone in Ravenclaw third year. Wait, Harry, Ron said, tugging his bag. We could ask a Gryffindor third-year student at lunch. Why rush? I'm just nervous. I want to know what tomorrow's class covers immediately. Harry said, determinedly pulling free and running out the greenhouse doors. Watching Harry run off, Ron and Hermione exchanged puzzled glances. When did Harry even meet a Ravenclaw third year? Ron asked. I don't know. Hermione shook her head. I've never seen him act like this. Harry ran, mentally calculating the route. He packed quickly, and since Ravenclaw students often lingered after class, the defense against the dark arts classroom would likely still have students when he left. Herbology greenhouses were far from the Gryffindor Tower but relatively closer to the Ravenclaw Tower, though he still had to cross the teaching area. The greenhouses were in the northeast, and Ravenclaw Tower was in the southwest. If Harry ran fast enough, he could follow the northern corridor of the square teaching area, reach the west side, climb up the Quidditch gate to the second floor, and then head south to the staircase near Ravenclaw Tower. The defense against the dark arts classroom was on the second floor, near the middle of the east corridor. Any Ravenclaw students returning to their common room would pass along the south corridor, perfect for Harry to intercept. Harry was gambling on luck, hoping the student he wanted to meet wouldn't go straight to the Great Hall for lunch. Most students liked to linger in the common room to read before heading to the crowded Great Hall. At last, luck favored the determined boy. Harry intercepted the Ravenclaw third-year student at the second-floor stairway of the tower. Walking toward him was a very pretty Asian girl, with long, waterfall-like black hair, holding several books. Her presence radiated gentle scholarly charm. Why you? Hi, Cho Chang, Harry panted, face red. We've met before, during the time Professor Dracula awarded the protective amulets. Cho Chang looked surprised at the messy-haired, flushed boy in front of her. Harry Potter, she said, smiling softly. You didn't really need to introduce yourself. I doubt anyone here doesn't know you. She politely smiled, waiting for Harry to say why he had come. Nothing serious. Harry glanced at her, quickly looking away. Our first class this afternoon is Defense Against the Dark Arts. I wanted to ask, what did you cover in your class this morning? Cho Chang nodded slightly, about to answer, but another voice spoke first. Want to know what was covered? Just ask me. A silver-haired figure suddenly appeared from somewhere, cutting her off. Advanced chapters available at PA with Grave TRN/Xenos. New chapter is coming soon. Write a review.